Dang it. Oh, man. We are live. We are live.
Hello and welcome to Morning's Culture. Good morning, sir. Hope you are doing well.
I am, Bina. I am doing most well. Yes. I'm excited to continue. And
Yes.
I must say hello to somebody on IG. They came yesterday and they left a comment, said these are wonderful books. Yes, they are. Yeah.
Yes, hello. Okay,
Yeah.
I don't know
So
your name, but
I'll have to go
still
and look at
welcome.
the. Yeah, I'll tell you the exact name in a moment.
Yes.
Anyway, please continue, Bina. Please continue.
Yes. Hello and welcome whoever is joining us live and will join us recorded. Just to say hello and welcome to Bonus Culture. Here we are actually nowadays we are doing the big huge project of capital R reading of books about Don Juan via Don Carlos. I always get confused with this. But yes, this is what we are doing. We are doing capital R reading and with the intent, with a very specific, clear intent that we are not just doing the capital R reading of books about him, but also we are going to meet and connect Don Juan. This is we are going to connect with him. This is the intent we have, because books, interpretation of books, translation, things can get a bit different. uh, what the actually that guy meant to, and this is what we are trying to avoid, that any kind of confusion, any kind of changes, and just trying to directly connect to the core of the intent to that person, of course in this case Don Juan. And this is what we are doing. Capital R reading in itself is a huge, massive, life transformative concept from way of impeccability. Once we start doing this, once we learn how to do the capital R reading, it is not limited to just reading books only. It actually expands to the capital R reading of situations, circumstances, people, and of course the overall intent. And this ability, which is very much deliberate, can be deliberately acquired. This ability of doing capital R reading can really transform your life in many ways, because it gives you the ability virtually to see things in ultra motion. Really, it happens. It is happening with me. You can see things in ultra slow motion. Yes, things are happening, going to happen in their, of course, on their own pace, but you will have this ability to see the minute detail, the fine details of situations. Like when you are in communication with someone, if you set your intent and if you apply capital R reading, you can see the subtle changes in their behaviors, the choices of their vocabulary, and of course their body language, and of course their intent. The most important thing, you will be able to understand the intent, and you will be able to connect with their intent also if you really want to. And this is the magic of capital R reading. It is not, again I will emphasize on that it is not limited to just to read books. It is to read whatever you choose to. And this is a big
read
huge
the Mourners.
Absolutely. Exactly as Sil says that, read Mourners. Reading, being able to read beyond what is said.
Correct.
This is
correct.
a huge deal.
Correct. And it's not about fantasy or creation or imagination. No. It is about applying a skill, the skill of implication, the skill of deduction, the skill of understanding, the skill of discernment, depth. It is connecting the dots, right? What's said are the dots. We need to connect them, right?
Yes.
And we can glean, and glean is the right word here, right? To glean a tremendous amount that's not said specifically. And this is an incredible superpower. It's a superpower, right? Plus, our Mourners reading also entails and involves us, Bina and I, bringing our perspectives, our awareness, our understanding, our background, right, to bear on what we read. And what we bring to the table is a lot. We are bringing way of impeccability. Now, what would you say if you were to describe way of impeccability to somebody who's got no idea what they mean by way of impeccability? Now, first of all, I'll say to that somebody, think about the name itself. Just take that. Oh, what is way of impeccability? I don't know. Well, instead of saying I don't know, imagine what it could be, right? Practice some capital R reading on the name itself. So if you have no idea and something says way of impeccability, how are we saying this? We're saying this in context, right? And we're saying we are bringing way of impeccability to bear. Well, it must be a thing of some kind. It's a way of. Well, what is a way of? It can be, all right, let's say way of detecting. Well, what would way of detecting be? Or way of simplicity, or way of patience. It's obviously a lifestyle in some way. It's kind of a philosophy, obviously, in some way. It is something that brings something practical to bear. Yes. So what I'm saying is, you can figure out from the name itself more or less what it is. Well, what is impeccability? All right. If you don't know, go and look it up. Now, caution. Impeccability in the dictionary, it's a bit of a lame job, right? And something else to apply to our understanding of dictionaries. He said dictionaries are not the final word on what the final authority on what words mean. You say, yeah, but where else are you going to go? And you got to think about it. You got to use it. You got to apply it. You got to look at the greater context. Why are dictionaries not the final authority? Because dictionaries have limited space. Oh, well, yeah, that sort of makes sense. Some terms, some words are very complex, like impeccability, right? They take a lot. And they just simply do not have the space to actually put it in there, right? And some concepts are extremely sophisticated and they've evolved, like impeccability. If we look at the typical usage of impeccability, it absolutely does not comply at all, not in one iota, with the typical dictionary entry, which in many dictionaries it still says the original meaning of the word, which was to be without sin. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, impeccability means acting with integrity, not being stupid, not being foolish, not being indulgent, not being childish, not being criminal, etc. Right? Many different uses for that's typically how it's used. Oh, he was impeccable in his career. He was impeccable in the task. Right? He didn't mess up. He didn't fudge. He didn't slack off, etc., etc. In other words, the person or she was impeccable. She was scrupulous, thorough, diligent, conscientious, etc. See, when you think about it a bit, then you can get extended understanding of it. All you've got to do is think about it a bit. Impeccability at its core is the best use of energy. It's also giving due respect. It's also acting and doing what's right according to you, your own inner conscience, right? When you're impeccable, you are always acting in concert, in harmony with your own inner conscience, right? Doing what's right in society can be very wrong sometimes, right? So we have to be very cautious of this term right. There's a lot of things which are right in society, supposedly, and I put right in inverted commas. But when you actually get down to it, no, yeah. I mean, in most schoolyards, bullying in some way, whether it's physical bullying or being nasty and sarcastic and snarky and putting people down and all this nonsense, that's just accepted as what you do, because that's superiority paradigm. You're looking for position in the hierarchy, right? And everybody's doing it in different ways. But this is considered right behavior. It's horrible. It's disgusting. It's terrible.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, it's ugly. It's nasty. And not all do it, right? Not all do it. Yeah, some do it and they're not comfortable with it. And that's the point. See? If you're impeccable, you don't do that stuff like that, because it's ugly, it's nasty, and you're thinking for yourself, right? Despite what's supposed to be right. So I'm saying that to get back to where I went on the side here, Bina was saying that We are reading to connect to the moreness of what's said. We are reading moreness, right? Capital R reading, extracting it, connecting it. But we also bring our own moreness in the capital R reading. And we are bringing way of impeccability, the psychology of the superiority paradigm, capital H hearing. And we're also bringing the Biala series, nobility, nobleness, right? All that whole entire mindset. We bring a lot to the table. And I bring a bit extra. Now, obviously, Breen is bringing her experience of doing capital R readings. We've done many of these, right? We've done it extensively. We are very practiced at this. We are skilled at it now. And also, I bring my own experience of having done capital R readings of the entire book series multiple times. Let me repeat that. I've done capital R readings back in the past of the entire book series multiple times. Yes, I pulled it out. I made quote files. I made books out of it for my own usage. I actually, by the way, you know, Bina, talking on this point here now, I'm digressing quite a lot, and I've shared everything, but I'll make this point real quick because it is pertinent, and then we'll start reading. What I want to say is, when I first encountered these books, it's a long story. They came at the tail end of my great reading project, and everything that I'd seen all throughout reading all the classics, that was my great reading project, right? I read all the classics that I could find at the time, and it was a lot of them. And took, you know, I made a big list, and it took me a couple of years. I bought them all, I acquired them all, and that was quite a task. And then I read them all in chronological order. And at first, the idea started because I simply wanted to know what people were referencing in books that I was reading. You know, like Hermann Hesse, he talked about Nietzsche, and Nietzsche talked about Schopenhauer and Kant, and I wanted to know who all of those are. At any rate, so I'm reading all the class. Then it developed into a. I said, well, if I'm going to read this, I want to get value out of it, and I extracted the quotes, and I had a nice big hardcover notebook, and I write it in there. But I was very sadly disappointed that I actually put very little in my big notebook, right? You know, all the quotes of value. The reason for doing that wasn't to remember them, but to apply them, right? Because you got to go over stuff in order to apply it and change your life. It takes a little while to implement new habits.
Yes.
That was my intent. But as I read all those classics, I had very few quotes and lines that I put into that book, right? And there was quite a lot of stuff from the Buddhists, but the Buddhists, you know, in the Buddhist literature, the language didn't resonate with me because it was ancient language, and it's so old, you know, because it's coming from the Sanskrit, which is not a language in use anymore, really, right? It's like Latin; it's a dead language, and you can see the thinking, the vibe. It just doesn't quite click and resonate. Even though you understand what they're saying, and it's a good point they're making, but it's not internally usable, because for it to be internally usable, we have to have language that resonates. Now, as part of our programs, you, the participant, have to continually practice doing repeat backs, which is putting things in your own words, because only then will it really resonate, when it's in your own words. And this is a skill that you can practice and develop. It's not a very hard skill to acquire. Get it very quickly, like, you know, a couple of days. You know, just have to practice a little bit. It's very quick to do. We all have this ability, we just don't use it very much. At any rate, so as I'm reading through the whole series, I'm getting a bit depressed, because I was hoping to find moreness, and I didn't. And it was like, man, you know, and I started to think what I did want to find, and I had no idea. And, you know, Carlos was at the very end of my list, because he's, you know, it's classics and it's recent. You know, this was at the end of the 70s that I made the list. And so, you know, Carlos's first book came out in the late 60s. So it was at the very end of this, because very few books become classics so quickly, right? Anyway, so when I finally came to, and Don Juan started speaking, so, yeah, this resonated. Because at that time, I didn't quite realize how much I had already created my own comprehensive, cohesive philosophy. I was too humble, too modest to even imagine that I'd done so. So when I started reading Don Juan, and a little bit when I read Nietzsche, you know, I wow, you know, like one time I was reading Nietzsche, and he said exactly in the same words what I had said before, even though it was an English translation from the German. I'm like, man, you're stealing my thoughts here, and I still never clicked. Right? It took me a long time to 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 have this idea, to become aware that I had created my own philosophy. Anyway, so when I came to Don Juan, it was exactly what I wanted, what I had intended. It was, to me, it was quite miraculous. Yeah, finally, this is, and I had been, was very specific in my intents of what I want. I wanted the good language. I wanted something that's exotic. I wanted depth. I wanted cohesiveness. And I wanted a comprehensive philosophy, right? Almost all the different parts. If you go to all the different philosophers or religions or literature or whoever, anybody who's got something of value, it's never complete. Right? There's always missing stuff. They have a kind of a part of the picture that they get all excited about, and then the rest is like, well, whatever, right? They're just focusing on a specific part. With Don Juan, all the parts of it, there's a cohesiveness to it and exotic. Now, there is a problem, though. He's kind of all over the show. So you have to kind of pull the stuff out for yourself, right? Which is what I did. And what I pulled out was very much resonated with what I had worked out for myself. Now I bring extra something. I have some stuff that is more unique to me that wasn't there. And Don Juan had some stuff that I hadn't thought about yet. So, all right, cool. So I also learned a lot, right? But by pulling this out, what I did was like what we do now. When there's a quote, I pull it out and put it into a spreadsheet, actually. And when I originally did this, spreadsheets were new. Lotus 1, 2, 3 had been out not very long. And it was incredible, right? I mean, it was a new thing that just blew up the whole world in a way, right? People have no idea today how much that really revolutionized things, right? Spreadsheets. And the first one was Lotus 1, 2, 3. You can go look it up. Anyway, you know, now we only know about Microsoft Excel, but that came later. That came later. They may even have bought Lotus and changed it. I don't remember. At any rate, so I took all those, put them in the spreadsheet. Why in a spreadsheet? Because I made columns and I put tags in the columns, and then I could sort the things, because Don Juan would talk about things like we were just yesterday, he talked again about the path with heart, and he's mentioned the path with heart twice before, right? In book 1 already, right, Bina? So that's already 3 instances on path with heart, right? And that's one of the things that he talks about. It's not that much to talk about. Some of the other topics, like capital B dreaming, right? Or in Carlos italicizes it, right? Because he puts an extra emphasis, dreaming as opposed to dreaming, right? So capital D dreaming, which is a much better way to distinguish it, it's lucid dreaming, right? Nowadays it's called lucid dreaming. It's being aware inside your dream. It has tons of stuff on this. Here's one of the entire books is called The Art of Dreaming. But when you take it over the years of writing the books and you put it all together, wow, you suddenly get a different viewpoint, right? Because you've seen a little bit here and there, and it's spread out over many books. When you see it all together, it really helps you. So I did 2 things with taking those. Actually, I did 3 things with all those quotes back in the day, right? With my spreadsheet. The first one is I pulled out all the quotes that go to the warrior's way, as Don Juan calls this. He calls this the warrior's way, which is your core fundamental way of being things. This is your character, right? Now he has a lot of things which are techniques and specific strategies, etc. Right? And I left out all of the sorcery stuff, because later it was never of interest to me, and also the power plant stuff, it was never of interest to me because it's not replicatable. I cannot use it in the bubble that I was. It's not usable. And I always was focused on what can I use. So the warrior's way is everything that is related to your character, not specific techniques like dreaming. See, dreaming is a technique. So I took all the warrior's way things and I put it all together in chronological order as they came, right? Well, of course, I had all the quotes in chronological order. So I guess I had 4 different things, right? All the quotes, just the quotes without sorting them in chronological order. Then I pulled out the warrior's way ones and I printed them out, actually. It was a thick file of paper. And so I had all of that, just the warrior's way. Then I did it by category. yes, Warrior's Way, dreaming, seeing, stalking, whatever, all the different categories, right? There's a ton of them, as you'll see later on. And I sorted them. Now the chronology is mixed up, and it's just by category, right? However you choose to sort the categories, I don't know. I didn't really have an order. Maybe alphabetical, doesn't matter. Then Don Juan, later on, when he talks about the Warrior's Way seriously, he says, a warrior this, a warrior that, right? Like a warrior is always the master of himself at all times, right? So any quote that had a warrior to it, a warrior ... And I made a list of all of those quotes, and actually I still have a printout of that. It's in my magical wallet that I carried around for years. It's a little, it's the edges are kind of where I folded it. It was typed very smallly. So this is quite powerful. I'll pull it out someday and see if I can still read it. And I actually, when I came here to America, I had some of those printouts with me, not the full-length ones, but the condensed ones, and the summary of what it was. And I actually dropped them off at Carlos's lawyer for his publisher to look at. And like I think a couple of years after that, Carlos did bring out a book of quotes, which he never had before. So I don't know if I had any influence in that or not. Yeah. At any rate, and I brought with a floppy disk, the original floppy, because at that time they didn't have the smaller, well, now they call them floppy disks, but the smaller one that was hard. The original ones were literally floppy, right? I carried that in my backpack for a long time, and I wish I knew what happened to it, because it would be nice to print all that out again. But anyway, and I'd have to find an actual floppy drive. Actually, I did find one. I have it somewhere. Yeah. You have to specially connect it up again. The technology is not there today anymore. But all right, you can still do it. So a lot of work went into that. But then over the years, with other things going on, like I said, I lost that and all of it. But also I was working on putting my own things together. And Don Juan says, a warrior needs to take what he has been shown and take it further. He needs to go further with what he's been shown. I forget the exact quote, but that's very close. And I
which means this is right. Very profound what you're saying, because as Don Juan says that that warrior needs to do that, like going it further or making it further, which means that the growth is essential. You cannot avoid that if you're claiming to be, or if you are aspire to be a warrior. Then growth, deliberately growing and focusing on setting your intent and working on it regularly is essential. It is something you cannot avoid.
Yeah, it's very important. It's very important. And so it took me a long time. I mean, I'm talking probably 30 years since I did all that work with Carlos. I always carried it with me, and I lived it. I mean, I lived in attunement all that time, right? And I was always applying, always putting into practice all of these things, practicing to be patient and building, learning to have actual capital P patience. And I just mentioned one skill, but all of the other skills, right? And Don Juan never really talks about discernment, but this became a big deal for me, right? And I was practicing discernment, all the skills. So again, attunement came at the point where I never, ever, 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 not even once, had the remotest, faintest, tiniest idea to make a program or a course. Never entered my mind. This was just not even a consideration. Again, I may have suffered in my past from excessive humility and modesty. It was very important to me to be humble. I was dreadfully afraid of being egotistical. Right? So I erred on the side of caution. And I knew I was being excessively modest and humble. But I'd rather do that than fall into the trap of self-importance and ego. At any rate, so just force of circumstance, came to where whatever income I was making, I needed something different. And at the time, I started off by making a workshop that we did via Airbnb. What do they call it? Like they have a special program where you go and stay with people, and then the people they're staying, they do something special, right? Yeah. Anyway, so
Retreats.
um, it was kind of something similar. It was not, they're not all retreats, because sometimes, I don't know, you go do horse painting or whatever, right? But it's some themes. Anyway, doesn't matter. They still have it. You can still do it. It's pretty cool. So then where I was at the time, people would come and I did this workshop, and I had somebody who did it with me. And it was a workshop on perspective shifting. And Cher mentioned this, right? And I still have it. It's better done in person, but I can do it online. It's very cool workshop, like a 2-day thing. And you know, a lot of exercises you do, and actually come away with something very valuable. That's really cool. And I don't want to spoilers for the workshop, because it does require you to start from where you're at, and then you do stuff, and then you're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. And you have this awareness that, you know, I just never thought a bit more about it. But now that I'm being asked to think about it, it's like, wow, there's a revelation that comes, and an awareness that you realize, now that you are looking at things from a different perspective, there are incredible implications. And those implications are quite mind-blowing. And they really like, wow, that really changes things, right? And they're life-changing, life-changing. Pretty much everything we do is life-changing if you pay attention. It's a big deal. At any rate, and then that was a little too slow, right? I mean, yes, we did them, but it wasn't quite enough. So, you know, it was in Sedona at the time, and it's expensive living in Sedona. Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Somebody is forgetting that I'm live. Okay. Anyway, so then I said, okay, well, we have to do some more. And somewhere along the line, the thing came to make programs and courses. And that's then when I did that, of course, you put everything that you have into it, and you do comprehensive and you thorough. And that's where the courses and programs came, which really, you know, I'd written the Biala series book before that, because I thought of writing down this entire philosophy that I've created. But I said, I don't want to write like a boring thesis and, you know, it's all there. No, I wanted to show it in action, show it in application. And that's how the whole Biala series came about. And that was quite a few years before I did the courses and programs. Yeah. So, you know, 5 or 6 years before that. Like I had no thought to do the courses and programs. It just kind of came my way. And well, like all things with attunement and force of circumstance, when it comes, yeah, yeah, yeah. One second. Anyway, so I'm saying that the moreness we bring, you know, those programs, they took on a life of their own, and a lot of work went into that. Bina helped me later on. And, you know, we put a lot of art in there, and we put a lot of work into making those programs. They're quite something. There's not just the content, but the actual visual experience, and there's audio too. This all adds to the entirety of the experience of doing it. Yes, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's about posts that there was Norma says, someone privileged to interrupt you in the live. Yes, Norma. Well, your message now too. See, so you're privileged too. I wouldn't pay attention normally, but they made a post about the book that, you know, my book that's just been released for pre-order, and it's now live, and we'll have a show on the Ask Biala book coming soon. And we'll go into detail and share about it. But they misspelled Biala. They spelled it with 1 L, not 2. And I was like, wow, really? You know, seriously, it just blows my mind. I mean, that makes a really big difference. So it was important, and I wanted them to fix it and do it like as soon as possible. So they fixed it now. Yeah. So very good, very good. So that's why I was interrupting myself. It's important there. Anyway, the main point I'm getting to is that all of these programs, right? And then Bina, when I started doing them, Bina came as a participant, as a post-beta tester, and then I invited her to just come every day, and she took me up on that invitation, and she just stayed, and she's never left, which is wonderful. And as we went through it, and I had other participants come. Bina was a co-facilitator. At first, she would just kind of be there and just be participating, just listening, right, just absorbing, because Bina really, really, really fully connected and understood and appreciated the value that was there. And she couldn't get enough of it, right? Because that's what happens when you find value. You want more, you want more. And you want to apply it, you want to use it, you want to integrate it and implement it and change, right, Bina?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Bina stayed. And this is so magical, absolutely so incredibly magical. And it's really, really awesome. And then, like I said, at first, Bina just attended when I had other participants. But then I encouraged, because I encouraged it with all the participants. I like community and I like collaboration. And when you are collaborating, so I encouraged Bina. Well, I said to her, Bina, what do you think of whatever? And say the participant shared something. I encouraged Bina to share her perspective, her mindset, her thinking. And as that went along, Bina became a facilitator. Now, there's some training involved in being a facilitator. And we did that, right? It's very powerful. So to facilitate is a very special skill. When I first used this word facilitator, I'd never seen anybody else use it, right? But then somebody else pointed to me, oh, well, it's more common than you think. I was a little disappointed. Not that I have to be original, but that, well, the way I use it is not quite the way it's typically used. So it just takes a little bit of the power of the term away. But facilitation, the way we use it, it's a skill. It's a very profound skill. We are doing a tremendous amount to make sure that we aren't shoving our ideas down somebody else's throat, and that people aren't just believing us, a participant. We don't want you to believe us. And you might say, but isn't that what taking a course in a program is? Well, in general, yes, but not for us. Not at all, no. When you do any of our programs, we do not want you to believe us. You've got to take it in because you believe it. And you must only believe it because it actually makes sense to you, right? Now, most of what I share in my programs, very little requires belief, right? I mean, I basically start off with the philosophy of belief not required. How do you do that? Through sharing self-evident sensibilities. Now, let me bring all this back to Don Juan, right? That Don Juan shares a tremendous amount of self-evident sensibilities. And this is what appealed to me with Don Juan, right? Because I don't want stuff that depends on belief. If I cannot verify, then what's the point? There's no value in it for me at all. Yeah. None. So I have to have self-evident sensibilities. Now, when something is a self-evident sensibility, that doesn't mean that, oh, I get it, this makes sense, and leave it there. No, that's just putting it onto your hard drive. You need to incorporate it into your operating system. Otherwise, your computer ain't changing, being an analogy for you. So then when you encounter the self-evident sensibility, you've got to go and apply it, right? And this, without application, it's all meaningless. This is a core point, a core tenet, a core theme, a core understanding, a core principle of all of what we do, right? It's integral to way of impeccability. Your impeccability demands application. Otherwise, what's the point? It's just BS. Right? Oh, I know this. I've seen this meme. I get it. It's like, wow, it's wonderful. And you can memorize it and you can quote it to somebody else maybe, but it doesn't change your life. You're not applying it. It's meaningless, right? Reading all those memes and books and courses, if you don't apply it, means nothing, right? That's why you keep doing it again and again and again and again and again, right? You see people looping all the time. They read every new self-help book. I was in that trap myself. It was very briefly, but I soon realized that, wait, I'm reading the stuff, but I'm looking for something new. Why am I looking for something new? Because, well, I haven't changed. So I stopped. I said, I have enough that I need to apply. And I started applying, right? And making the programs and the courses, it's also an application. When Bina and I facilitate, that's application for us, right, Bina?
Yes, yes.
Through you have to be applying whatever we are doing in order to be able to truly facilitate. Otherwise, it's all just BS, right? And
Exactly.
that's a lot. It's a lot harder said than done, right? It's not easy. It's not easy at all. Yeah, yeah.
You cannot just talk about it and start sharing with people. Again, coming back to the sharing concept. But sharing is something you cannot do if you don't own it.
Correct.
For sharing, it
Correct.
is crucial, it is unavoidable. You have
Yeah,
to own
yeah,
that, otherwise, you cannot share. You can just tell about it. And
yeah,
telling is useless. We have been told so many things from our teachers, parents, and of course now internet memes and motivational books. Did it ever work for us? Not really. Very minimum. Very minimum.
yeah.
Less than 1% actually really stays and change our life in overall.
Right,
But
right.
because they
Exactly.
have been told, they are not sharing. Because when a person
Right.
have this intent to share, they have to own it. How can you share
Yeah,
something which you don't own? So yes, so
yeah,
that is the basic and of course the requirement of facilitation, that you have to own it. Otherwise, you cannot share.
yeah.
No?
Yeah, it's very important. This is very, very important. Very important. All right. On that note, let's actually do our reading. I made a long story here, but anyway, somebody commented and said the Don Juan books are great, and I'll have to go back to find where you commented because I wanted to acknowledge your comment and say hi, but I can't find it. So okay, so be it. Let's get on to doing our reading here. Go to dashboard and see the chat comments. Joseph Ross says, oh, wonderful, Joseph. Two authors to add to your list of the classics if they are not there, William James and Ken Wilber. Yes, I've read them, Joseph. Yeah. William James is especially important to read, yes. Yeah, like I said, Joseph, I did a very extensive, at that time there was no internet, so I had to have other means to do it. The internet didn't exist yet. I mean, personal computers weren't around yet. When I put together my list, it was right before personal computers actually came about. They came out shortly after that. But still, when I was doing my list, no internet whatsoever. Our internet came much later than personal computers, of course. At any rate, so I sort of, the library was my core principle, and bookshops, right? That's where. So in searching and figuring this out, I came across a list of Penguin classics. So the publisher Penguin had the series called Penguin Classics, and I found a pamphlet advertising this with all the books listed. Wow, this is cool. So then I looked a bit more, and Encyclopedia Britannica had made their version called Great Books of the World. And fine, I pulled all the things from Great Books because, again, Great Books of the World, this appealed to me. I didn't want to read the classics, just Western classics. No. Right? I mean, if you look in classics, if you go to classics and you're in America and you search on the internet, you only find American classics. Like, seriously? I mean, compared to the classics that are out there, you're getting a very, very small piece of the pie, right? So you need to be worldwide. So it was very important to me be worldwide. And of course, I started with the oldest things that I could find. At that time, it was the Rig Vedas, right? And then, went through from the early Indian stuff. And later you come, of course, to the Greeks, like Confucius. Lao Tzu comes a bit before Confucius. But Confucius and Aristotle, by the way, and Buddha, they all more or less, they're not contemporaries exactly, but they fairly close. Aristotle, Plato, that golden age of Greeks, and Socrates, they all at the same time more or less as Confucius and Buddha, which is quite fascinating because a lot of the similarities that overlap. And then, I put it all in chronological order. So you're reading, and then you see the progression of thought. You see the progression of philosophy. You see the progression of sophistication. You see how there are questions that are out there in the world that are a big stumbling block, right? And people get stuck on this. And then you see later that question gets resolved. Okay, I get it now. And then you see the development of thought and awareness. That was the thing. The actual quotes, the actual applicable value was so little, but seeing that progression, that was valuable. It changed my whole perspective on everything, right? I mean, you can see it if you take the Bible, because the Bible goes over many centuries. You can see that progression of thought throughout the Bible. That's quite fascinating. So yes, like I said, William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience, particularly, it's a significant work. Again, for me personally, it was fascinating to read, but it's not my personal path, right? There's also, I think I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, related to William James is Merciae Iliadae, Eliede, I think it's spelled, but Merciae, the first name. You can look it up, right? And this is the guy who brought the term shamanism, right? And he studied all of that. Again, fascinating stuff, but not particularly applicably useful. It's interesting and very useful, but interesting, but you can't actually change who you are, right? I want things to change me by me. Yes, it's very important. Like I mentioned before, Mescalito is incredible. Whenever I read this about Mescalito, and there are other entities in other parts of the world that does similar stuff. When I read about the power and value of Mescalito, right, and I'm reading Carlos's experience, and when Don Juan says, this is a teacher, I say, man, I'm tempted to go, because I am in Arizona. I could probably get access to this, right, if I made an effort to, right? I mean, I would have a genuine, earnest intent to do so, and it would be. But what prevents me from doing so is the danger. What is the danger? I'm not talking about the physical consequences or emotional or psychological whenever you're taking strong things like that. None of that. That's a price I'm willing to pay to be taught. The problem is being taught. I am learning to be who I want to be from something external, not from myself. That's a vulnerability that I don't want. That is something that is very scary for me. Now, certainly for other individuals to whom their life isn't devoted and they don't have the motivation to learn by themselves, to learn for themselves, to learn how to learn, to construct it by themselves, fine. That's a way for you to learn. But me, I've been on this path all my life. I mean, very consciously and deliberately since age 10. I want to be able to do it by myself, for myself. This is very important to me. I don't want that vulnerability of having a dependence on anything, right? Even if it's as profound as Mescalita. And I am fairly certain that Don Juan would agree with me. Yeah, it's very, very powerful. So very cool, very cool. And Norma says hi to Joseph, and Joseph says Tanara, no problem. And not to be causing a ruckus, but I'm sure Don Juan would see his knowledge, being able to be honest. No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all, because it's about utilization. I'm not putting his knowledge onto a spreadsheet for the point of memorizing it. I'm putting it on the point to utilize it, and I know that I am accurate in saying this, because Don Juan recommended Carlos write the books. He did something else. He said, once you've written them, throw them away. Now, I have written extensively on memorable events and significant experiences. And when you go into what I share there, it's a technique, it's a tool. It is a way of connecting to the moreness. Once you have and you made the awareness and you integrated and applied it, those stories lose their pressure. and you can throw them. That's why, once I started living all of my own philosophy and all the notes, all the spreadsheet with Carlos, that's why it became lost. It became irrelevant. Like Carlos said to, Don Juan said to Carlos, once you've written the books, throw them away. And Carlos was aghast. He was horrified, right? So it is a tool of application. And as such, it's very valuable. And it's totally in harmony with what Don Juan says. It's when you understand. See, I don't look to follow Don Juan's teachings as an obedient student. I couldn't care two hoots about that. And I have no interest in doing that. It's not what I do. I am applying to make it my own. A lot of what Don Juan says corresponded to what I'd already figured out for myself. Some of it was new. I bring some new that Don Juan hasn't mentioned. Maybe he does, but it's not in the books. It doesn't matter. The point is, you've got to make it your own. Otherwise, it's useless. The spreadsheets are there for the purpose of me making it my own. And like I said, once you've made it your own, I don't have them anymore because it's not needed. It's not necessary. So no, he would not be find it humorous. He'd see it for what it is, as a valuable, useful tool, a tool of application. This is completely exactly what he is doing too. All of these things are there for the purposes of application, right? Very, very important, very important. And Norma says, as are most spreadsheets, unless they are your own. I'm not sure what as are that means, but spreadsheets are very powerful. It's tools. Everything that I share, a way of impeccability, it's called a toolbox for deliberate living. So all of these things, they aren't there to put into your memory. They're there to be utilized. They must become innate. They must become part of your body, that you feel it. If you don't feel it, it's useless. That's in way of impeccability. So it's all about having that awareness, discernment, understanding that enables and allows for and makes application easy. Perspective shifting, it's been life-changing. Yes, sure. Yes, sure. Without application, it's all meaningless. Says sure. Yes, absolutely. I could see Don Juan imitating your typing. Yeah, maybe. No, this is a very important point that Joseph, that really matters, right? Yes, in one way, Don Juan thought it was very humorous that Carlos wanted to write this down. But then he also understands the value of it. Once you've expressed it, and you have expressed it in a way that leads to understanding and application, the urge, the power, the necessity to write it down, that goes away. Because you've taken out the understanding, the application, you've changed. And now you don't need that tool anymore. But it's a powerful mechanism for getting change, right? And when we understand how language, and particularly story, is so integral to our brains, and how change and language are intimately connected. And when we understand emphasis, which Don Juan never mentions, but when we understand that emphasis literally rewires the brain, we now understand making that spreadsheet. It's all about emphasis. Yeah, I'm emphasizing when you write something down rather than saying it. It's your brain's, oh, this must be serious because you're writing it down, right? And then like for instance in the programs, you do your repeat back, you write it down, you come on Zoom, and now you talk about it, right? And you may refer to your notes, but now, so you're doing a double thing. Plus, in way of impeccability, you have your dictionary of power, which changes your language. And if you really want to change your language, right? The way you use language, what you say. So all of this, I have a very, very deep and powerful understanding of the mechanics of actual change. Right, Bina? I'm talking a long time here. I want to hear from you, Bina. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I just muted myself.
Yeah. So, Joseph, I'm not messing about with what I'm doing. I'm not somebody who's just, oh, I know about Don Juan or this and that, all the classics, and talking about the stuff that I know. No. What I remember is very little. I can quote here and there, but I never was interested in quoting stuff and remembering it. Never. Right from day go. Whenever I pulled those quotes out of the books, they were for purposes of application. Once I'd applied it, it didn't matter anymore, right? And that's why I don't have those notes anymore, because I just lived it. And now when I quote stuff, I'm quoting from it comes from inside. It's automatic. It's innate. I mean, I have a quote file and I add quotes there every day to that quote file because all of this stuff is mine. I own it now. Like Don Juan says, you gotta make it. He doesn't quite say make it your own, but he said something similar, right? No, it's all good. Yeah. But you know, I had that part of impeccability, that thoroughness. You know, I went all the way. I can't do things like halfway. So I took all the quotes and then organized them and then integrated them and put them into the categories. And of course, then lived them. And of course, much of it overlapped with what my own was. And that was very important. Yes, for a long time, I had those quotes as Don Juan's quotes in my head. But then over the years, I started shifting to making it my own. And when I did the programs, I realized how important that was, right? So something that Don Juan never says is you need to make it your own, right? This concept of making it your own, it's not expressed by Don Juan. It's not even implied by Don Juan that I can remember, right? But it is crucial to learning. So I bring a moreness to what Don Juan is. And as Don Juan said, you've got to take it further. So I'm not playing about here and I'm not sharing stuff and it's not like, oh, I'm just putting things together and making a package from everything. No, everything that is in Way of Impeccability and all the other programs, it comes from my practical personal experience of application, not just for myself, but also paying attention to over the years when dealing with others, right? So understanding learning and particularly understanding motivation, this is crucial. My psychology, I'm not just worked, you know, I'm not just a philosopher and having put together philosophy, I've also put together a psychology. So that makes me a psychologist, right? I call it motive psychology. I really understand motivation, right? And how learning takes place. Motivation and learning very intimately connected. If you're not motivated, you're not going to learn, right? Well, you might, but it's difficult, right? This thing of cultural appropriation, no, there's none of that in Don Juan. None, zero. Absolutely none. Don Juan would kind of scoff at this idea. So what does it matter where it comes from? If it works for you, use it. It's end of story. That's it. If it's useful, you use it. No matter where it comes from, it's totally irrelevant. Completely another. So in other words, cultural appropriation is kind of saying, I cannot use this because somebody else, it's their thing. No, this is as part of Way of Impeccability or the Warrior's Way. Absolutely absurd. Sorry, Joseph, but this is completely against everything Don Juan stands for. It's about usefulness. It's about value. It's about application. It's about doing. The stuff that Don Juan talks about, you can find in cultures all around the world. All right, let me back up a little bit here, right? When these books first came out, right, Carlos is writing them. Don Juan is an actual real person. But many said, no, Don Juan is an impossibility. And they refused to believe that Don Juan could be an actual person. For me, this was never an issue. I couldn't care two hoots if Don Juan is real or fictional. What does it matter? I'm getting value from what he says. So if Don Juan says something, you know, that's very important, like, you know, be impeccable. Right? I never saw that anywhere else in any other writing. Never, not once. Right? It's unique to Don Juan. And it resonated with me because, well, I called it rightness at the time. I love this word impeccability, right? And the way Don Juan was using it, right? So this was a big deal. But when Don Juan says that, be impeccable, is it any less valuable if Don Juan is a character? No, it's equally valuable. It doesn't matter if it comes from a fictional character or a real person. And just because he's a real person doesn't mean he's always sensible. Go and look up foolish quotes by famous people. Yeah, Gandhi said a lot of foolish things. Einstein said a lot of foolish things. Yeah? So just because somebody's famous doesn't make what they say valuable, which is another reason why we have to have discernment. We have to have discernment. Otherwise, you fall into that trap of just believing something because somebody says it. Now, I respect Don Juan, but I don't buy what Don Juan says just because he says it. Now, I have a wonderful story about magical, marvelous Bina. And I'm going to give Bina full, incredible credit here. Because Bina is somebody who applies the concept of receptivity. Yes. And this is a concept that's now in our dictionaries of power, and it came about because of Bina. Right? And it's a story called Sophie the Sophisticated. Sophie and the Philosopher, actually, the story is called, but it's about Sophie the
Yes.
Sophisticated. And Sophie says, I will not be influenced. Right, Bina?
Yes.
Go ahead. You explain about receptivity. I'm talking too much here.
No, it is wonderful because sometimes we need that, and especially for the valuable stuff Don Juan is sharing, we need
Yeah.
to be very careful and very thorough about this.
Oh,
So
yeah.
this type
Oh,
of
yeah.
discernment is always needed, and
Oh, yeah.
I agree with you. This that we if wherever the information, the knowledge, the wisdom is coming, what's the point of being a person
Yeah.
of knowledge if you are not sharing it freely
Yeah.
and openly? That was the idea, of course. And when they were sharing,
Right.
of course, it has to be shared further. This is the path, this is the path, this is the way things and people learn. And of course, because we are not going to stay forever. Any source, anyone who is a source of any knowledge or wisdom, is not going to stay forever in this world, at least in this form. So next time again they will start from the scratch, and of course they will do something. Yes, some people do get some download from the previous lives or maybe some future life, but still it needs a lot of time. That's why the sharing is crucial for the overall humanity to grow.
Yeah.
Of course,
Yeah.
I'm
Very
using
crucial.
humanity only, but I'm just including every
Very
entity, everybody
crucial.
in this, and it
Yeah.
is needed. So the receptivity
Yeah.
concept, of course, it works. It worked, and it is working for me, and I assume that
Yeah.
it is going to work in my whole life, okay, in future also. To be receptive, okay, it is to be open, with open heart, with open mind, just receive what is valuable for you, but with a very clear intent that yes, right now I am receiving because it deserves to be received fully with due respect. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to influence, because I'm going to check everything that it does make sense or not to me, and then of course I'm going to utilize it. This is what I have been doing throughout my life. For the of course After starting way of impeccability, I'm just saying this throughout my life, like, because it seems like a lifetime. So in way of impeccability, of course, it becomes very sophisticated and it becomes more clear for me. It was there, but it was not as defined as it has to be. Receptivity is something that, okay, yes, like it is exactly like, I love this analogy for receptivity, that when someone send you a gift, and you know that it's a wonderful, beautiful, nice package, and of course it is coming from your dear one, whoever it is.
Yeah.
Are you going to just say that, okay, at the doorstep, that, okay, no, first I need to open it and dissect it, and of course, and then I'm going to receive it? No, because you have this, of course, you don't know what's inside, but still you have some association, some sort of trust that a person who is sharing, who is sending me this gift, will be something nice in it. And that's why you are receptive towards free gifts from your loved ones, from your dear one, from your respected ones.
Yeah.
So it is exactly, and of course then you will open it, and then it's okay, yes, oh, it is relevant, oh yes, it is not, it is going to be the later story. The first is to receive it with open heart, with open mind, and this is what
Yes.
receptivity is.
Exactly.
What I'm going to do
Exactly.
with this gift, it is, of course, it is absolutely on me, that okay, how I'm going to
There
use
you
it or
go.
utilize
There
it.
you go.
I
Yeah.
maybe I will just throw it out. So no, no, okay, yes, the person was nice, of course, but sorry, this gift was not for me. Okay, and
Right.
it is
Right.
absolutely on me.
Yeah.
But for me, again, it is the in one liner: receive first, dissect later.
Yes. And then end with making it your own.
Oh, of
That's the
course,
key, right?
of
That's
course,
very key.
yes,
That's very, very key.
absolutely,
Now,
yes,
yeah. So on this point about cultural appropriation, yes,
yes,
Don Juan talks about being a person of knowledge. Now he says man of knowledge because he's talking to Carlos and he's a man and Carlos is a man, right? So he uses the term man of knowledge. But later there are women that come into it. So person of knowledge. But being a person of knowledge, this is not a product of culture. Not in the least. Being a person of knowledge is a product of your learning, your growth, your application. And the idea is to have this independence of being. Again, not a term that Don Juan specifically uses, but it's certainly implied by a person of knowledge. A person of knowledge will have independence of being. Yeah? If you have independence of being, this is something that transcends any culture. Yeah. Now, you may become a person of knowledge from one specific culture. That's going to be very difficult, because as I don't know of any cultures that have enough internally to get you to that point, right? You find all the elements that you need all around in all different cultures. So you need to culturally appropriate, right? Because it is appropriate to do so. Yeah. Because you need to, you're not interested in saying, well, just because somebody else thought of it, I can't use it. How does this make any sense in the point of learning and growing? And when we understand that the intent of the universe is to enhance and develop awareness, when we understand this, now here's something that I'm saying, well, it's a self-evident sensibility, but only if you go and actually test this, right? Pay attention, look around you from that perspective, and you're quickly going to see, oh, wow, yeah, this is actually so. Everything that happens in your life is for the purpose and point of the enhancement and development of awareness. That's the meaning of life. Don't take my word for it. Go and test it, and it will be self-evident to you in very quickly, very short order. But to get to that point where you are being aware, when you have developed your character, where you have independence of being, where you are a person of knowledge, as Don Juan calls it. I call it having independence of being, because knowledge it's dangerous, because people think acquiring knowledge is putting stuff on their hard drive. No, what Don Juan said, what's the point of knowledge that's useless? So knowledge to Don Juan means applicability, application, integration, having it as your own, being able to use it. That's why I rather say independence of being, because when you have independence of being by implication, you're not dependent on anything. You're not even dependent on your memory necessarily, right? And you have enough character where you can't be as insulted or offended. You're not dependent on anything external, right? Like I said earlier, right? You're not dependent on something to force you or teach you or whatever, right? You have done it yourself. You've got all the tools within yourself. And this is very, very important to understand, that when you get to that point, you take what's useful and you apply it and you make it your own. Doesn't matter where it comes from. It's totally and utterly relevant. And if you're really going to enhance your awareness, boy, it is absolutely crucial that you step outside of a cultural bubble, because that's what culture is. It's a bubble, and it's very limiting when you understand it as a bubble, right? All cultures are bubbles. We want to transcend the bubbles, right? You're not going to get to have that independence of being or be a person of real application. I rather call it a person of application, a person of independence, a person of moreness, without transcending the limitations of your cultural bubble, right? So that's why, for me, this cultural appropriation, it's got a whole other meaning. This is about people being false and phony and saying, oh, I've got this bright idea, and they just stole it from somewhere. It's about theft. But to me, I see something useful. I don't care where it comes from. I make it my own. It's totally irrelevant where it came from. I'm not even aware sometimes of where the origins is, and I don't care. It's totally irrelevant. And let me make this further point, right? So I was talking about when the books first came out in the early days, this question of Don Juan's authenticity, being real or not, was a huge deal in academic circles. And people wrote books about it. One guy specifically, Richard B. DeMille, I still remember his name very specifically. I don't remember the book, but you can look up Richard D. DeMille and Carlos Castaneda, Don Juan, and it'll come up, right? And his book was all about disproving how Don Juan is not real. Why? Because he says, look, Don Juan says this, but this actually comes from the Buddhist. This comes from, I don't know, Plato or whoever, right? Or this comes from some indigenous other peoples, from the Aztecs or whoever, right? He found all of the sources of where Don Juan said, like, and sometimes even the wording was very similar. But of course, this is exactly proves the value of Don Juan. Richard never really clicked onto this to say, wow, here's a guy who is saying things that you can find represented everywhere else. Now, I already knew this before I started reading the books because I was doing that great reading project, and I saw how the stuff was all over the show. And then I recognized it. Don Juan has got it in his own language, in his own style. Sometimes it's very similar, yes. But I recognize it myself. I'd reinvented the wheel many times. When I read this, I was like, oh, I'd figured this out for myself already, you know, just in thinking about it as a teenager, as a boy, right? So this is part of learning and growth. Things are reinvented continuously. We're always looking to see who is the original. That's an ego thing. Who cares who did it first? Only ego. Only ego says, this is mine, this is my property, I've got. It's not. Knowledge cannot be owned. Sorry. You know, and just because you figured it out long ago doesn't mean that I didn't figure it out for myself, which I did many, many times. Some things are like, wow, okay, this is a revelation, because I never got to the time yet. I likely would have figured it out myself too, because all of these things, when you think them through to the end, and you practice and you apply perspective shifting to multiple perspectives, you figure them out, right? So it doesn't make it owned by anybody, because anybody can figure it out for themselves. And then, like I said, in order to use it, you got to put it into your own words. Once you make it your own, it's yours. Doesn't matter where you got the idea first. You've made the effort to make it your own, then it's yours. It's irrelevant where it came from. And if you want to really grow and learn, we have to transcend this idea of getting stuff from others. That's just the starting point. I'm not getting anything from anybody, because if you do, it sits on your hard drive and it's useless. You've got to make it your own. And in that transformation process, you now are creating something new and original that's yours. You may use that as input, yes, but the end result, it's yours. It's yours and it's unique to you. And it's very, very, very important, right? And so when we look at Don Juan from a cultural point of view, Don Juan is international. And what he talks about is stuff that's all over the show from everywhere in the world. He has some stuff that's unique to him, yes. He has some stuff that is, you could say, all right, it fits into this culture, into that culture, whatever. But in the totality, Don Juan is not any culture in the least. Don Juan is him and his lineage, and he's the end point of that lineage, right? Very important. Don Juan's lineage did not go public as far as we know. Well, in a way it did, through Carlos. Carlos is making it public. Yeah. They may still continue, right? The other apprentices, they may continue that lineage style. But Carlos made it public. And I feel this is, if you look at things via attunement, and yes, where attunement is so important, and I keep emphasizing this, understanding the Carlos books through the lens of attunement changes the entire perspective. Changes the entire perspective. When we put it together with the intent, right, of the universe to enhance and develop awareness, we see the necessity of Carlos writing these books, of making all of this public. There's a necessity to it. Yes, why was it important to be private before then? Because the era up until the 60s did not allow for some things to be public. They would squelch it, they would ban it, they would suppress it, they would get very anti it. Even when Carlos came out, there was a lot of antiness, right, from religious circles, who is devil worship and all this. There's no devil worship in, you know, I don't even know if devil worship is a real thing even. But I suppose people are foolish and idiotic in some way, and ego will make them do extraordinarily idiotic things. So I suppose some idiots probably would do this, right? But again, it's none of that nonsense in Carlos, but it came out, oh, it's witchcraft, and it's automatically negative. Just terminology, right? Or sorcery. Not really understanding what he's doing. At any rate, so to me, when you really look at this in the bigger picture, and you look at the totality, you see the intent of the universe, which is the enhancement of the development of awareness. You see how this came in the books. For instance, when I was right there from the very early days of this, right? And when you went to the bookshop, right? They didn't know where to put Carlos's books. At first, they put them in the anthropology section, but then they realized, well, it's not really anthropology. And then they put it in spiritualism, native studies, philosophy, self-help. They kept shifting around like this. They never knew how to categorize it. Even the Library of Congress had a hard time. They changed their categories on a regular basis, right? I think now it's probably, I don't know what it's categorized, but when you understand this and you see how it got spread into these different categories, it made it accessible to a very wide audience. And the fact is, and later on, like now, there's a bit of a negativity towards Carlos, right? Because of the people who post Carlos, right, and showing Carlos's BMNness, as I call it, right? And so, and you know, with the people that followed him, there was a lot of negative reports. But that just is, to me, the universe saying, if you want to take the stuff, you have to look past the nonsense and you have to be discerning. Because if you just go by the surface image, you aren't going to go very far. Like this first book, on the surface, it's all about power plants, all about drugs. And you can easily get the idea this is the most important thing. No, you have to have the discernment to see past that. It's not, right? And this is verified later on by Don Juan himself, right? And by the underlying logic. It's not about belief. It's about the underlying rationality and logic. You got to figure things out for yourself. Very important. His lineage, yes, it didn't go public, but it also did, right? Joseph was saying Don Juan's lineage did not go public as far as you know. Well, it did through Carlos, but not specifically in any other way. I'm not saying you are using the knowledge in a bad way. I'm just saying, as wise and intelligent as the followers of these teachings are, they certainly made a choice for hundreds of years not to share it publicly. They had the reasons. Yes, like I said, up until the 60s, right? And especially in previous centuries, you share something like this, you're putting your life in danger, which is why the time in the world wasn't yet ripe for it to go public, right? The knowledge, not the lineage necessarily, but the knowledge, right? However, right, because religion was so obsessed with control, anything, doesn't matter whether it was valid or not, anything that didn't come from the religion was seen as heresy, and you know, you get burnt at the stake, right? Now, even before the 60s, we didn't actually literally get into that kind of physical trouble, but you know, you could be like in your business dealings, in your general life, you could completely be shoved aside and be persona non grata, and you'd have a very difficult time doing business with anybody if they consider you to be into all of this stuff, right? The 60s came along and all that changed. Suddenly you could write about stuff like this. Now, all right, Carlos pushed the edge, and as a result of Carlos, wild stuff like this became acceptable, right? You know, it wasn't like in the 70s and in the later 70s, in the 80s especially, you started to see things come as a consequence of this. For instance, shamanism. Today, you can become a shaman. We know people who call themselves, I'm a practicing shaman. You can go and study it and learn it and take courses. This started with Michael Harner. I mentioned this before, right? He had a book called Shamanism, right? Where he taught it as well, where he made this something that you could acquire yourself, regardless of who you are. You might be an accountant working, you know, for IBM, right? And you can learn to become a shaman. Bina has a friend who's in charge of the music department at a major university, very prestigious job title. And he's a shaman in addition to his musical career, right? So this changed because of the 60s, and Carlos is a major factor in the philosophical, cultural development of the world, right? And well, more also particularly in America, but the world, right? Because a lot of the stuff went worldwide. He made a very big difference. It's one of the reasons he was on the cover of Time magazine. He brought out stuff that was completely unacceptable to talk about, right? In general society, like shamanism, yeah, to be all interested in this and be interested. Well, you're anti-church, you know. What's wrong with you? You know, are you a devil worshipper? You know, are you a heretic? But that all changed in the 60s, right? The power of the church was broken in the 60s. Yeah, and Carlos is a very big factor for that. We don't even realize. I mean, I grew up in that exceedingly conservative society, which goes back, that culture, that limitation goes back to medieval times, right? It's the same logic, but that was broken in the 60s, and I saw it happening in real time. It was very, very cool, right? My point is there is okay cultural appropriation and there is not okay. Yes, that's what I was saying before. If you're just claiming something that you, the originator, was, you started from somewhere else, well, you know, that's just theft, right? So to me, whether it's cultural appropriation or nation or not, it's the underlying point is it's just dishonesty, and that's not cool. So I mean, you're pretending, it's bullshit, it's phony, it's nonsense. So yeah, that's it. Right? But when I take something wherever it comes from and I make it my own, I don't think of that as cultural appropriation. I just think of that as appropriateness. End of story, right? Because it's useful, it's valuable. You know, I mean, it's like when I was living with the Bushmen, right? And they would be out for the tourists selling their crafts and stuff, and they'd be walking around bare feet. Now, sometimes some of them did have sandals or some kind of sneaker that they'd acquired, and all the visitors would always say, "Oh, that's such a shame, losing their cultural ways." That was reverse. They seeing that as negative cultural appropriation, the Bushmen wearing shoes, right? And I always marveled at the arrogance of this. Like, really, it's not part of their culture to evolve and grow, and if something's useful, you do it. That's part of your culture. You know, one time you went barefoot too. I don't see you now saying, lamenting the loss of your traditional ways. Yeah, it's just idiocy. It's completely idiotic. Shoes are practical. That makes sense. You know, if you don't have shoes, yes, you end up with nice thick soles and calloused feet and all that, but you still get thorns in your feet, right? So shoes are very practical and sensible. They matter. They make a difference, right? Because thorns are out there, and even animals, right? I mean, we all know the story of the lion with the thorn, and then the mouse pulls it out, right? It's a big deal. When animals get thorns into their paws or hooves or whatever, their feet, it really matters. It makes a big difference, and shoes prevent that, right? So it's a very big deal. So you can't hold it against the Bushmen for them taking the shoes and culturally appropriating this. It's like they're evolving. They see something useful and they do it. It's like, this is our root culture. Is a culture of, you see something useful, you do it. This is what made humanity what it is, from taking things and utilizing it. Right? This is very, very important. Wherever you saw something useful, you incorporated and used it. Right? And later it got messed up with cultural stuff. Right? But at root, this is what evolution is. Right? And if you really want to go there further, it's not only when you notice something useful, but actually figuring it out for yourself and creating a solution, because you're thinking about it, you're testing, experimenting, exploring. This, I mean, our civilization is driven by those few who do that. People in general just go along and accept whatever is, right? Necessity is not the mother of invention. Sorry. When we today, right, you have flush toilets, yeah, indoor plumbing. This was possible back in ancient times, at the start of pottery. When they first made pots, you could have had a toilet, because your basin is ceramic, the bowl is ceramic, and that's it. You know, the rest you can do with wood and that, and you can make ceramic pipes. You can completely make a toilet from ceramics, right? A flush toilet. And you could, most people today would see a flush toilet as a necessity. Yes, indoor plumbing as a necessity. They don't see it as something, well, or whatever. But how long have we had flush toilets? It's a very modern thing. A couple of 100 years at best, right? Yeah, indoor plumbing. This came late 1800s. It started to come into it. Why? Why did it take so long? Right? So necessity, not the mother of invention. The desire to improve, that is the mother of invention. Right? Sometimes necessity generates that, but not always. Sometimes necessity prompts you to make the effort to go and figure it out. That it generates that desire to improve, but not always. Like in the case of flush toilets, centuries went by, nobody thought to improve this. Yeah. I don't know. I've used outdoor toilets where you go out in the middle of the night and it's freezing bloody cold. Yeah, it's horrible. I thought, man, this sucks. You know, I lived in places where that was what people still had. Hell no, man. For me, I would have invented something better. Sorry. Yeah. Anyway, so Joseph says, my point is there's okay cultural appropriate and there is not okay. My point would be that there has to be continued, assuming that's assessment of respect or discernment of respect the spiritual gifts, cultural artifacts, and symbols of other people. Yes, respect is inherent to way of impeccability. Absolutely. But my greater respect is for learning and growth and the sensibility underlying it. Yes. If it's sensible, I'm going to make it my own and use it, no matter where it comes from. That honesty of making it my own, this is the most important thing. This is the most important thing. Of course, you're going to acknowledge as appropriate, but that the underlying motivation, Joseph, of saying this belongs to me, this is us, what stimulates that desire for that recognition? That comes from a motivation of specialness, recognition, status. It's stimulated by ego. If you don't have ego, you don't care about stuff like that, right? So let's look at it in the bigger picture, which is what we continually do. What I bring to the table is abstract overview thinking, universal thinking, where you transcend bubbleness, right? And when you really look at this big picture, like I just did, and when you see how ego is involved, which is a functional superiority paradigm, you say, well, if I didn't have ego, I wouldn't care if it's special to me. I wouldn't care for the recognition. I wouldn't care for the acknowledgement. That's an ego issue, right? So as we transcend and we get independence of being, and of course we leave ego far behind, right? And we become a person of knowledge. Ego is not an issue. As Don Juan will tell you, eliminating self-importance. It's one of the key things that he stresses. It's absolutely crucial if you want to learn and grow. So all of the stuff that is, that we see that furthers our identity, which we think is so important, it's only important from an ego point of view. And when you see that, then it all starts to implode, right? This is very important, right? Let me go back up. Joseph has a lot to say. I want to really, it's wonderful stuff, Joseph. Yeah. Right. So we have to understand things in a greater context, which is coming from this way of impeccability, overview perspective, moreness perspective, greater awareness perspective. And we see the world in a very different way. It's not okay to go into a Hopi Kiva and share their knowledge. It depends on, again, to share their knowledge as Hopi knowledge is one thing. But if I acquire knowledge that's useful to me and I make it my own, I'll share my own knowledge. And I'm not sharing their knowledge, I'm sharing my own, right? So if you're going to hang on to knowledge and restrict its use to others and not sharing it, I know, to me, that's a bit limiting, I think. That's very limiting, right? Especially in our world today. Why would you not want to share knowledge? If it's useful, share it. And to me, sharing you're making it freely available to anybody, right? Whatever I share, use it. Doesn't matter. You don't have to acknowledge me even. I don't care about being acknowledged. And I don't care that you use it or not either. I'm sharing so that it is available to be used. And to me, when people have shared that I have been able to use, it's been very valuable to me. And I think this is how we enhance our way. Sharing is the ultimate collaboration. Yeah, because when we share and we get connect to somebody that somebody shared, and we find value, right? Through that, we add to the world, we enhance the world, we further the world, we make the world a better place. Fantastic collaboration. So sharing is an incredible magic. And this whole idea of keeping things to your culture, I don't know, for me, sorry, Joseph, but this is, it's a bubble mindset that keeps things limited. I'm saying I need to be special to hold on to my knowledge. That to me, it's ego motivated, right? It's a bit insecurity motivated. So I'm very cautious about this, Rosa. I understand what you're saying, but I understand it within its context, right? And I understand why it's important. But when you look at the bigger context and you see, wow, okay, I really see it now in a different light. And then we see there are great limitations to hanging on to making knowledge proprietary. Great limitations. And
so
I'm not
I would
a fan
add
of
something
that.
here.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I personally feel that, okay, of course, the ego superiority paradigm is, of course, could be a reason for that, to not allow other people to share that. But also, I feel that, okay, maybe they were not being very clear about, or maybe not very vocal about this the sense of or the concept of appropriateness and the impeccability. So to limiting that, they were trying to make sure that the knowledge, which can be very powerful, of course, will not be misused by people who are not impeccable, or that, okay, who are into the superiority paradigm. So they were just keeping it very tight and close to make it sure, because they were lacking in this concept of impeccability and, of course, appropriateness. So that could be their reason, of course, not only the superiority paradigm, but also that lacking the understanding of appropriateness and impeccability, and of course not being sure about how this knowledge is going to be spread. Like, okay, you have this license system for the weapons. Why you have that? Because you are trying to make sure that it is not going to be misused. Of course it is going to be misused because it is available, but still you have some regularization for that. And this, I personally feel that at that time they didn't have that other mechanism to be sure that, okay, who are. So that's why they were keeping it very tight, that only the person who is come into the personal contact, then only they can have that, they can acquire this knowledge. So it could be, yes, superiority paradigm, but it could also be that they were trying to make sure that it is handing over or just going to someone who is impeccable, who will be thorough, and of course will give it value, of course, due respect. So it's kind of like, okay, a bit makes sense, of course, that, okay, why they were doing that. Of course it is there could be many other reason also they have that, which includes the superiority paradigm and also that the understanding of appropriateness.
Exactly. We have to pay attention and we have to be discerning. And very important, we must not generalize, right? So Joseph says, to not respect limits is to be like most of the history of white people's anthropology. You'll never hear me using this term, because it's a generalization. Yes, the people who came, many of them were criminals. Many of them had a bias that they didn't care, but not all of them. Not all of them. Some people have a great respect for indigenous culture and they are admirers of it and they think it's special and wonderful and spiritual. That's how I grew up, at any rate, right? I never had this thing of saying, well, it's just mine, I can take whatever I like. No, especially Native American culture was very revered and seen as very spiritual and more when I grew up, right? So again, we have to be careful of generalizing. Just because something is, has a great effect, sometimes a minority can have an effect on the majority, right? Because they are the ones that are doing stuff, right? They're the ones in charge, for instance, right? And it doesn't mean it represents the people. However, so Joseph, you say here, right? To not respect limits is to be like most of the history of the white people's anthropology. They thought they had the right to take whatever they wanted to. Yeah, they did not understand the nuances or base knowledge that the tribal people had. That's just their ignorance and stupidity and foolishness. But this statement, they thought they had the right to take whatever they wanted to. This applies to all indigenous peoples. Particularly in America, you can see this very, very clearly. Yeah. Horses. We associate horses and Native American culture, they sort of go hand in hand. Horses are not native, they're not indigenous, they are not something that is historically part of Native American culture. Most people might be surprised to hear me say that. Yeah, horses aren't native to Northern America, to the Americas. They didn't exist here. They were brought over by the settlers, right? By the Europeans that came here, right? And Native American horses specifically, these came from wild horses that the Spanish had abandoned down in today what would be southern Arizona, California, and northern Mexico, right? These were horses that they'd abandoned when they settled, and I don't know, for whatever reasons, and they were just kind of running wild. Now, horses were culturally appropriated by indigenous Native Americans. Same with guns. Same with many other things, matches, right? Many other things, right? So if you want to talk about cultural appropriation, it goes both ways. Now, you're talking about things that are spiritually sensitive. Right, guns and horses weren't particularly spiritually sensitive, yeah? But, there are many Native American Christians today probably Buddhists and other things too, right? But again, culture is like that. You see something that's valuable, you use it, right? So cultural appropriation goes both ways. Just because it's something that's now spiritual and like a horse that's practical, still the same thing. Yeah, a horse is not traditionally Native American, not at all. Neither are guns, right? So we have to look at the stum in context, or matches. Yeah, I mean, there are many other examples. I could go on. I'm just thinking of things that are practical. Yeah. But again, like I said, so can a Native American not become a Christian or a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Muslim or whatever else, right? A samurai. See, I don't see why not. Of course they do, but that's not considered cultural appropriation, right? So when you look at this whole thing, to me, this whole idea of cultural appropriation, sorry, it's a bubble that's protecting something that, fine, if you want to insist on it, it's isolationism, it's bubbleness, right? And you're going to be stuck in your own bubble. Furthermore, right, forget about taking things from the Europeans that came here, right? What about, you know, take the arrow. What we typically think of, we see Native American arrowheads, right? And it's got a particular shape. It's got those little edges that it goes in and it won't get stuck. Somebody way back when originally just took a pointy stick, right? And they threw them as spears and said, well, how can we do this better? And they invented bows and arrows, right? Now, if you look at arrowheads, that design, it's pretty much common across all of the various different indigenous peoples, right? But you want to tell me that they all independently invented this? It's quite possible, yes. But likely somebody in one tribe somewhere did this, and then, you know, others saw this and they saw the idea and it spread and it went all across, right? So there's cultural appropriation across indigenous peoples as well, right? If you really study this, you can probably find, oh, this practice and this, and you know, you'll see it regionally and stuff like this, right? So cultural appropriation is something that's always gone on. Before the idea of cultural appropriation came along, people saw something and they used it. They never thought two hoots about whether this came from somewhere else or not, right? It wasn't important. It was whether it was useful or not. And the same applies from a practical thing like the arrow, and, you know, how to make fires, different ways of, you know, starting this, right? This is stuff you spread, they spread, right? Unless you truly live in complete isolation. And we know there wasn't isolation because you had conflict between people. Yes, some of them moved and tried to be isolated. But, you know, wars, whenever there's a war, there's not isolation. And then you capture people, right? Typically they take the women and children and you bring them into your own tribe. What happens to all that learning and knowledge that the people had acquired? It now becomes part of the new tribe, because the mothers are teaching the children and the stuff that they learned from before just gets passed on, right? So this is something that's just part of the whole thing. This idea of cultural specificity and this belongs to me and me only. This is a modern thing, and it's a protection of identity and ego. Sorry, but that's the bottom root of it, right? I'm trying to maintain my specialness. I'm trying to maintain my uniqueness. Yeah. And you people in the end, and all of us, are sentient beings. Your specific culturalness is totally irrelevant when it comes to the universe and being a sentient being. Yeah. I mean, if we have some civilization that contacts us, like aliens, right, from some other galaxy or universe, and they come here, they're going to just see humans. They're not going to care whether or not, you know, you have a specific cultural identity. They're going to say, especially if they're advanced, right, and into awareness, it's not going to matter one iota. It's an awareness. Now, when we see ants, we don't care whether they are different ants or army ants or worker ants or whatever, right? We don't care what type of ant they are. Ants are ants, right? All right, sometimes it may make a difference, but we don't distinguish. We don't care about their cultural identity as ants, yeah? So when we look at the bigger picture, we start to realize that this is a limited bubble, Joseph, and it's very important, right? That's why you never hear me use terms like white people or black people, right? Because it's a myth. You know, there's no such thing really, right? And Native Americans, they're all different. People are people in the end. No matter what your cultural value is, like I said with farmers, right? Whether you're a Hopi farmer or a Navajo or Cherokee farmer or whatever, Apache or Sioux, what difference does it make? You're a farmer, right? Whether you're a South African farmer, whether you're a freaking, you know, Chinese farmer, or you can even be a Nazi farmer, you are still a farmer. Yes, you had other nonsense going on, but at root, you're a farmer. Yeah. And when people identify with that, when that's their focus, they don't, their beliefs are secondary. They want to be a farmer. They want to be a doctor. They want to be this, whatever the thing is, they want to be an artist. That's what drives them. That's what motivates them. And we start to see people are really the same in the end. The cultural stuff is just flavoring. It's like the clothing you wear. Yeah. Whatever clothing I wear, it doesn't change me as a person. I'm still the same person, right? No matter how absurd and ridiculous the clothing is that I might be wearing. I'm just having fun with myself. So when we understand this in this context, Joseph, it changes things very much. So I'm a universalist. Yes. People ask me, oh, what do you believe in? I believe in everything. That's it. In our infinite, marvelous, wonderful universe, right? Anything is possible. So how can I not believe in everything? It's as simple as that. Right. Like many fake shamans running around today, waving their eagle feathers, thinking they understand the native world they expound. Those are fake people, Joseph. And I'm against phoniness and fakeness, right? So to call that cultural appropriation, to me, is not actually accurate, because this whole term of cultural appropriation, yes, I understand what it means, but really, it's sort of a polite way of saying thievery. Thievery is something else. If somebody's claiming to do stuff, this is just phoniness. This is just falseness. Whether or not they are doing it in a cultural context or not, there are many phonies that are doing phony stuff that claiming, well, just in the field that I'm in self-coaching. There are many people. What is that name? The guy's name that was posting all these posts and he eventually got caught out. Seth something, I think his name was, right? He made a quote by Yoda, very famous quote of Yoda's, and he said it as his own, right? And he was posting all the stuff. He had a huge following. People thought he was this very wise guy, and all he was doing was taking quotes and passing them off as his own. Right? Do you know what I'm talking about, Bina?
No, I'm not signing.
Shetty. I think his last name is Shetty.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
What's the full name? Jay Shetty. Jay Shetty. There we go.
Yes,
Jay Shetty.
Yes.
Right? I mean, this is just complete and utter phoniness. Now, the stuff that he said, the quotes themselves, did they have value? Yes. So again, see if you're concerned about, all right, I mean, was he passing on valuable wisdom? Yes. He was being a phony to say it's his own, but the wisdom itself is still valuable. Whether or not it's his, it doesn't matter. Right? Which is, again, to me, don't be listening to stuff because somebody is important. I mean, he became important and he had a big following and people were following him very avidly because he was saying stuff that was valuable. But they confused his celebrity with having worth. Celebrity does not mean worth, right? Just because you're a celebrity doesn't mean I must listen to you. This is superiority paradigm logic, which is complete and utter rubbish and nonsense. It's totally foolish, right? No, just because you're a celebrity doesn't mean you can't say stupid stuff. Again, I absolutely recommend Google stupid stuff said by famous people. Very, very eye-opening, and it'll change your whole idea. That's why, as part of a way of impeccability, you got to learn to self-quote. Don't trust the quote because it's a quote and it's famous. No, that doesn't make it valuable. What makes it valuable is when you understand it, you figured it out, you've applied awareness, discernment, and understanding, and you've applied it, and you've gotten value and usefulness, right? Capital V value, capital U usefulness. Very, very, very important, right? So Joseph goes on to say, so I would say by what you are doing and what I stress, that I am pro you doing what you are doing, is you are operating as a medicine person in the way of talking from a native viewpoint. Yes, certainly. In one context, you could see it that way, right? Again, for me, the medicine part, which is involving, medicine, right? That's not what I do. But medicine for the soul, medicine for the spirit, medicine for your psychology, for your emotions. Yes, absolutely, right? For your character. Yes. That part of what a medicine person does, where they are acting as a life coach, right? Or as a spiritual advisor, right? That, yes, certainly I fulfill that role. Absolutely. But to me, I want to transcend the boundaries of bubbles. This is very important to me. That's abstract thinking, overview perspective. It is intrinsic, elemental, core, fundamental to what I do and what Bina does with me, right? And what we do, mourners culture. Monas is obviously Monas culture, which we keep talking about. This is what we're doing here. We're sharing Monas culture. Monas culture, by its very definition, is completely and utterly inclusive of everything. Exclusivity and having this bubbleness, this is completely antithetical to Monas culture. Completely and utterly, right? Goes completely against it. And Joseph goes on to say, it's a very nice thing to say, Joseph. I appreciate that very much. Yes, I think all people need medicine people that are real and came by their knowledge from following their path with a heart. Exactly, and that's me. Yes, I mean, you may not agree with what I say or disagree, and of course, in Monas culture, we don't go by agree and disagree. Understand. If you understand, you'll know that I am absolutely 100% real. Right? Whatever I talk about, and that's why any topic that I talk about, I sometimes will go on for a long time. It's not a rehearsal. I didn't learn this. I'm not reading from a teleprompter. Yeah, no, I'm talking. It's coming from my inside because I know it. I only talk about stuff that I really, really know. Sometimes I'll talk about stuff from a speculative point of view because I'm exploring and investigating. But when I'm talking at length about something, and I'm sharing my knowledge on it, I only talk about it when I really know it. Otherwise, I'm uncomfortable talking about it. I have to really know it. Otherwise, I feel like a phony, and I won't do that. Right? Like I said, I will then qualify it and say, I'm not sure about this. Let's investigate, and then it's an investigation. But when I'm expounding on something, sharing my knowledge on something, it's only because I'm expert at it. I'm not even comfortable talking about stuff that I know fairly well. No, okay, no. I talk about stuff I know, right? Because I applied, lived it, used it, right? Like attunement. I live attunement, right? This word, it's my word. I've never seen it anywhere else, like Monas. It's also mine. But it's because it's something that I'm expert at because I apply it and know it, right? So yeah, phoniness and hollowness, this just is against to have impeccability. And you have to be, it's not honesty that's the most important thing, but self-honesty. I could not do something that I cannot self-honestly be okay with. I can't. I just can't do it. It's just not possible, right? So, I may be completely mistaken in some things, but I'll be very earnest and very real about me believing, and I don't believe, right? And I have very good reason to support why I say it. I might still be mistaken, and that's a wonderful thing. Ego or other perspective is things given by your gods and ancestors and spirit. Wow, that's very interesting. Yes, ego has its value. A wonderful quote of mine, which I absolutely love. It's a very, very cool quote because it has multiple meanings. And a very short one too. And it is, ego is a tool in the multiple ways of thinking this, right? I mean, ego is complete foolishness and nonsense, but it's also very valuable, right? So yes, ego from another perspective is something given by the gods. But when you go back and you look at the gods, well, when you look at the gods through the lens of the superiority paradigm, we say, oh my gosh, the culture of the gods is a horrible culture. Yeah, it's a superiority paradigm culture. And you talk about that, like this white people anthropology. Well, go back to your gods and look how they behaved. They thought they could just do whatever and just take whatever and do whatever, right? So God's culture, very different thing. Joseph, I have a very profound book that I wrote, and it will become a series because there's a lot to it, right? It's called The Council of the Gods. And this is at some point in my story, right? The gods come together and they have a council. Now, it's not the first council. It's this council comes about right before Christopher Columbus is about to, is looking to get funding, right, to do his expedition. And the gods come together. Now, the gods have some ability. They can't see the future entirely because the future is a variable. It constantly changes. But some things, because the likelihood of them happening is a very high, excuse me, high probability, that with their glimpses of the future, they know already that this is likely going to be true. It may not, but it's very high probability. Like, for instance, the Europeans discovering America. At that time, before Columbus, right, there'd been the Portuguese and the Dutch who'd been exploring, particularly the Portuguese, right? Look, the first guy to get to the southern tip of Africa, Bartholomew Dias in 1488, right? And then he went back home, and then Vasco da Gama came 10 years later in 1498, and he went all the way to India, right? So they were exploring the world. It was only a matter of time before they continued to explore further and found other places, right? You know, Australia and America and so on, right? I mean, they may have found it from going across the Pacific rather than going across the Atlantic. It was just a matter of time before this happened, right? Because there was that exploration was a big deal, and they had the means, the ships and that to do it, right? So the likelihood of this happening. So the gods come along and said, well, this is a very serious deal. What's going to happen if America is discovered? Yeah? Well, you've got all of Europe and Asia, whichever side discovers it, right? There's massive population pressure. There's massive resource pressure, right? I mean, just if you look at simple things like lumber, right, or coal, right? I mean, coal has been extracted for centuries in Europe, millennia, not just centuries, right? I mean, coal goes back to ancient times. Right? So, and it's a precious resource. Metal is very expensive in that time, right? Medieval times, Renaissance times, metal is expensive because, well, it's already become scarce because it's been mined a lot, right? Now, when you discover a new continent, two of them, right? Well, it's one big thing. Such a vast, massive, where the resources are all there, they're untapped. Of course, the greedy people who can make money out of this are going to come and plunder the place, right? So now, if there's a consequence, when you have this and you have the technological advantages that Europe and Asia had at that time, right? Less in Asia than in Europe, but still, right? Particularly in Europe, because they have guns and metal technology, right? This allows them to have a disproportionate ability to dominate. So what's going to happen? You're going to have exactly what did happen when Columbus comes. Thievery, plunder, wiping out the indigenous people because they're just a nuisance and they're not of value. The resources are what's value. So the council comes together of the gods. And in my council of gods is from all over the world, right? Not just, you know, Greek gods or European gods, no, all over the world. And they get together and they say, what are we going to do about this? Are we going to allow it or not? Yeah. Now you might say on the surface, well, obviously you want to thwart it because how is this beneficial? But my two main protagonists who happened, I just chose them, not any particular reason, Jesus and Mercury, right? And that's it, right? Hermes in the ancient Greek, but right, he's more commonly known as Mercury, and he likes Mercury because he is somewhat mercurial, right? And he's kind of a bright spark, Mercury, right? And he's a bit cheeky and irreverent, which makes him an ideal protagonist. And Jesus, I chose Jesus because Jesus has also gone further. I mean, he was is revolutionary in his day in terms of thinking. And, you know, like I talked about before, he teaches fluid reality. So Jesus is very spiritual, but he's also very thoughtful. He's very earnest. He's very sober, right? So when you combine the progressive wildness of Mercury and Jesus's earnestness and his sincerity and good character and thoughtfulness and looking at the bigger picture, right? They come up, they touch on something that they get from the future, from the philosopher in the future, who does a grand extrapolation, and he calls it the coming of the golden age, right? And in this grand extrapolation, they see a possibility that could happen, and they figure it out. And they come to understand that the world, the way it is now, right? This is now in the late 1400s, right? The Roman Empire has just fallen, finally, right, after millennia, right, with the fall of Constantinople in 1488. So now the Roman influence and dominance in at least Europe and Asia Minor, right, and which goes all the way out into the East as well in some things. I mean, look all the way back to Alexander, right? He went all the way to India. So you have this influence spreading there. But that culture, the Romans at least had some measure of democracy as part of their history. Not always with the dictators that came along, but they weren't a feudal system. They didn't have nobility as part of their legacy. But with the fall of this, the nobility, which was around obviously before the end of the Roman Empire, uh, it, 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 it started to become very predominant, right? And all of the innovation in the Renaissance, right? Where did it go to? It was co-opted and privatized by the nobles, right? The old nobles, the negative nobles, the BMNs, right? It was co-opted by feudal culture. Well, feudal culture is you got the Lord, and Lord, I love this, that God in Christianity is called Lord, and also your Lord, your local Lord, right? Your Baron or Duke or whatever, is also called Lord. Manipulation of language, subversion of religion to serve this dominance need. Now, all of Da Vinci, he was funded by the nobles, and they had the money, they had the resources, but instead of making his genius, putting it to public use, no, they co-opted it for their private benefit and usage. So the innovation of the Renaissance basically petered out and died, and it didn't really further humanity as a whole, yeah, because of this feudal system. So now Jesus and Mercury are understanding the limitations of the prevailing culture. And it doesn't just apply in Europe. Europe is on the leading edge of it potentially because of technology, but they see it all over the world, the same system, right? Essentially, you've got one person in charge, and it's a dictatorship, and they do whatever they like, and things stay the same. They don't really change. They don't really progress. They don't really move, right? And also, many of the problems are because of limited resources. And they understand that, and they glimpse from the future makes them aware that wealth is the game changer. Why? Because when there's wealth, you have free time. Back in those times, people are working 12, 14-hour days, right? And when you get home, you eat and you go sleep. And that's really it. You don't have any time for spiritual activity, really. Yes, you go to church on Sundays, but you're not really thinking about it. You're not really progressing. You're just buying what's being sold. You pay lip service to it. You try and apply it if you're a good person, and that's it. You're just looping. There's no real evolution of spirituality, of thinking, of learning, of growing, of personal development, of personal awareness, right? When you're a religious person, this does nothing for your awareness. It actually makes it less, because you're just believing and you're just conforming, right? So it's a very negative situation for humanity at home. And the suffering is incredible. It's tremendous, right? The majority of people are suffering because poverty is what we think, even rich people back in medieval times are very poor compared to the wealth that even, basic minimum wage people have today. So lots and lots of suffering, right? And no real evolution from an awareness point of view, from a spiritual, philosophical, evolutionary point of view. So now Jesus and Mercury are saying, and they call this Council of the Gods, because what to do about Columbus? Columbus is having no success, right? He went to lots of people before he went to Isabella, Queen of Spain, who finally funded him, right? And nobody wanted to know his case. Now, in my story, the gods interfere, and they create an omen, which a soothsayer, astrologer, whoever, they have all these advisors. This thing makes them say, okay, because Columbus is not a nice person. Columbus is actually a very not nice person. He's a bit of a horror. But Jesus and Mercury advocate for enabling Columbus. Why? Because they understand the great extrapolation. In this coming to America, yes, in the shorter term, the Native Americans are going to get sacrificed, yeah, and they are going to be losers. But in the longer term, because of cultural appropriation, actually, I use a different term, and I forget the exact term that I use, but really, it's about conqueror guilt. If you look at conquerors throughout history, right, especially when there's an egregious conquering, when the conquered kind of basically get wiped out for no good reason other than the greed of the conqueror. Not everybody gets wiped out. So as a result, to assuage that guilt, what the cultures do is they then incorporate, culturally appropriate, incorporate the wisdom, the mourners, the roots into their own culture. You can see this through the Greeks doing it with all the people they conquered, and we see a lot of Eastern ideology and belief systems that coming in through the ages. Like, for instance, just the popularity of Buddhism and Vedic cultures. Hinduism never really caught on because Hinduism is kind of complicated. But Vedic cultures, which is, at root to Hindu and Buddhist cultures, this with the colonial British, right? Buddhism became very popular and became very cool again because of conquer guilt, right? The people who weren't doing the egregious acts, the common good people, they felt bad that we're just taking from all of these cultures and wiping them out and stealing from them, essentially, right? The whole horror of colonialism. So they wanted to honor them by taking their spiritual stuff and other stuff and making it valuable. Well, look at yoga today, right? It's all over the show. Again, it's rooted in the same underlying conquer guilt mechanism, right? So now we have, in a sense, positive cultural appropriation. Why? Because those cultures, like I say, when I grew up, Native American culture was something very magical, very awesome, very revered, very spiritual, as the same as ancient Vedic culture and Sanskrit culture, etc., right? And many samurai culture, many things, not only Native American, but all across the world, right? So indigenous cultures has this romance to it. And that romance is coming very much because of conquer guilt. So Jesus and Mercury understand this. And they say, yes, in the shorter term, and they're talking about millennia now, right? To them, they think gods. They don't think in terms of, a year, 2 years, 10 years, a dozen years, decades, centuries even. They think in terms of millennia, right? Aeons, never mind millennia. In the longer term, the cultural value of all of the Native American cultures, right, and this reverence that's going to come about through cultural guilt, this is going to be more valuable, right, than simply the culture staying where they're at, right, and in the overall for the world, even so, if you take being a Native American today, it's way more preferable to being a Native American in the 1400s, right? That was not an easy way to live necessarily, right? When you are living without the benefits of technology, there's a lot of work involved, right? I've lived this way, and it's a lot of work, right? And it's not easy, and you don't have much free time, right? Because all of your time goes to taking care of your survival, right? It's not an easy way of living, which is why more sophisticated farming methodologies evolved, right? Because it's to free up time, right? And of course, technology massively frees up time. Wealth massively frees up time. We have free time today that we never had back in the day, right? And when I grew up, farmers, right? Yes, even though they were very religious, they still worked on Sundays. You got to milk those cows, right? So there's stuff that you have to do. And yes, they had a bit of free time on the Sundays, but that was it. For the rest of the time, they worked from sunrise to sunset, which in summer is a 14-hour day. Yeah, I've done that too. I had a job where I worked from literally the sun came up, that's when you started to work. Sun went down. In summer, that's a very long day. And when you get home, that's it. You wiped out. You go sleep. You eat and you go sleep. That's it. End of story. Right? So now there's no free time for spirituality. There's no free time for the enhancement and development of awareness. So my book about the Council of the Gods is now there's a bigger motivation to this. The bigger motivation behind the book is to show when you have an appropriate perspective, you understand that what happens in history that might be seen as a great negative, seen from the greater perspective of the enhancement and development of the universe, of awareness, from a universal perspective, we see the profoundness, the awesome, the magic. When I look at it this way, it makes sense. There's a moreness to it that I never thought before, like the moreness of the invasion of America. What has resulted from it? That abundance of cheap raw materials, yes, this added to the wealth of Europe. What happened when wealthy Europe became wealthy? Yes, things started to change. Because whenever you have wealth, you got more free time. When you have more free time, people start to think, they start to advocate. And look, around about that same time, you had the church starting to split, right? You had Protestantism. I don't remember exact date of Martin Luther, but it's roughly in that era as well, right? I think it was in the 1500s somewhere. But you start to get evolution. Why? Because people have the free time to think about stuff. And you can see that in literature too, right? You see the advances in philosophy, and now people are pushing the boundaries and questioning and challenging. I mean, Luther was huge. The dominance of the Roman Catholic Church was complete. It was complete, right? In all of of where the church was, right? But Luther came along and started Protestantism, which disagreed fundamentally with very powerful core principles of the Roman Catholic Church, right? Teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. Heresy, but yet it couldn't be taken as heresy because it's not truly heresy, right? So very important, very big shift. My point is that when we start to look at things from this bigger overview perspective, which is what the Council of the God story is about, that we start to see that there's when you look at things from this overview perspective, things which are like wars, they make sense sometimes. There's a necessity, there's a reason for it. And so as we go through the centuries, I'm explaining history from this greater sense of understanding. Anyway, to get back to the story. So the point was that Jesus and Mercury do this extrapolation, and they say, what's going to happen when all of these raw materials suddenly come in and Europe gets to be very wealthy? What's going to happen? Well, Europe is then going to need labor from elsewhere, which is exactly what happened, right? And also, their wealth is going to create markets for the poorer countries around them, Northern Africa, Asia Minor, right? Because when people have wealth, they don't want to be doing things themselves. They want stuff else to do it, right? So now that is going to spread. When somebody's got wealth and I make stuff cheaply, I've got an automatic market, right? They're going to buy my product. Now we'll see this in modern times, of course. So as this goes along, of course, America is also going to become wealthy because, yes, initially the stuff is being plundered, but of course people are going to stay, they're going to settle. And the settling of America, this is another instance where the gods get involved, right? The Boston Tea Party, they're involved there, and America and its pursuit of democracy, right? The American Revolution and the American Constitution. This is very heavily influenced by the gods in my story. Now, I didn't know this at the time of writing the story, but as I later on I came to see in early American the time, the frontier times, the time of the Constitution, right? That time, right? Many anomalous things happened which furthered that, right? Like when Washington, he had a small little army and he was going to go and he was marching to confront the British and he was way outnumbered and he would have, the chances of him winning were ridiculously slim. But there was this great big hurricane that came near Washington. Very unusual, very anomalous. And that hurricane changed everything, right? And something anomalous, unusual, and it enabled Washington to get more people and it caused problems for the British. And because of the hurricane, essentially, he won. There are many such instances of anomalies. Now, you say, well, the Americans also caused a lot of problems. Yes, they were horrible to the Native Americans. But again, that conquer guilt, right? Keep it in mind. It's very important from a later point of view. But initially, what are they doing? That greed is resulting in the greed of Europe being wealthy. Europe being wealthy allowed the newly independent America to have a ready market for their goods and services and raw materials, right? Which is why America became wealthy, became the wealthiest country so quickly, because they had already the market of wealthy Europe to sell to. Whenever you have a wealthy market and you can make cheap stuff, you've got automatic business. You don't have to struggle for business. It just happens, right? Then as America became wealthy, what happened, right? I don't know if you remember, Joseph, But I remember this when I grew up as a kid, that Japanese stuff was called Jap crap. Right? Today, you think, wow, why would you call stuff, if you don't know, right? Japanese stuff, it's like synonymous with high quality. What do you mean Jap crap? Was this like a racist thing? No, it truly was kind of crappy stuff. Why? Because after the war, the Second World War, Japan was horribly poor, right? And cheap labor was abundant. And they started making the same junky, crappy stuff that we see typically coming from China. Well, at least that's changing now, that we have seen from China. But it started with the Japanese. And they very quickly became wealthy because they have a wonderfully good, excellent work ethic, right? But too excessive somewhat. So they very quickly, and they were playing by American rules, right? MacArthur, an American, wrote their constitution. So business, they really went into this and they very quickly became wealthy. What happened when Japan started to become wealthy? And this happened in very short order, right? I mean, like in 2-3 decades. By the 70s, Japan was starting to be a wealthy country already. Yeah? Who started selling to them? Taiwan and Hong Kong, right? Japan was the original crap. When I grew up, Japan is already fading as the crap. It was like a legacy thing. Hong Kong was where all the junky, cheapy stuff came from, right? The little gifts, your trinkets, your nonsense stuff, right? It was all from Hong Kong. And then it became Taiwan as well. But then what happened to Hong Kong and Taiwan? They're no longer the sources of the cheap stuff. Other places started selling to Hong Kong and Japan and Taiwan, I mean, right? And trickled out, Vietnam and Thailand and other places in the area, right? And finally, and I predicted this, right? In 1980, I predicted that China would get as part of this. It was inevitable to me, right? Now it happened fairly late, in the late 80s, I think it was. One of the Chinese premiers came over to the West. And when he landed in his airplane, right on there, debarking from the airplane right there, right? He said, the first thing he said, coming back from his trip, the very first words he said is, wealth is glorious. And everything changed for China after that, right? And then they started making stuff and selling stuff. And I said this was inevitable. Yeah, you've got China, a poor country, struggling. Right now, when you go to China, China has the largest middle class in the world today, right? But back then, they were just really poor, struggling. It was not a fun place to be. But they started selling to America, Europe, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, all these other places, right? They started selling to the whole world. And this was part of my grand extrapolation. I predicted it would happen, and it did. And then I said also, well, what's going to happen when China and India two together, and the subcontinent, Bangladesh, Pakistan, etc., right? And that whole southern subcontinent, that's 2/3 of the world's population. What's going to happen when they get wealthy? They're going to have to look for cheap labor elsewhere. Well, they can't really get it from South America because that's already come up with their proximity to America. And well, they're going to have to find it from Africa. That's exactly what's happening. And the Chinese are very smart, and they've been investing in Africa very profoundly, right? They have a significant foothold in much of Africa now, right? And they are starting to build factories there with the cheap labor because they need it. It's quite fascinating. What's the end result? The end result of all of this, when extrapolated all the way, right? If you go back to the late 70s, early 80s, the idea of China being the wealthiest country in the world, and they're very close to being that, right? Or one of the wealthiest country. This was an absurdity. It was ridiculous. But it's simple math. It's simple extrapolation. It's simple dirt. It's simple obviousness, right? When you have a market that's wealthy and people have cheap labor, they're going to make stuff and sell it. It's like dirt, right? It's just an obviousness. So Africa is likewise going to come up. Africa today, when you actually go there, it's a very different place to Africa when I was a teenager living in Africa, right? A young man, right? I mean, these countries are sophisticated. They got lots going on. There's moreness. Just look at the Olympics, and you see the amount of representation and the range of representation from African countries, right? Because if you want to be in the Olympics, this is something that you have to have some wealth. Right? It's difficult for poor countries to represent quite a lot because to do those things costs money, right? To train to that level and that extensiveness. It's a luxury, right? When you're into survival living, there's no gymnastics in your world. Forget about it, I mean, even when I was a kid, the gymnastic equipment in the school, This was a major expense. It was a big deal to have it, right? And it was a really, really huge deal. Yeah? Just athletic equipment, hurdles and the gates and a javelin to throw, all of that stuff. Yeah, it wasn't always available. At any rate, so my point is that this wealth that we see today is spreading, and pretty soon, within the next 10 years or so, likely, we're going to see Africa starting to have middle classes. Well, they already have, but where the poverty that's been traditionally associated with Africa, it starts to go away, right? And you start to have Africa being in the same space as the rest of the world, right? I mean, look, you don't think of South America as having poverty and starvation and stuff like you have currently in Sudan. But that is not because of a lack of ability to have wealth. It's coming from political considerations and foolishness of people trying to dominate and all this, right? It's unnecessary, in other words, right? And that will go away, because when those same people are looking to dominate, when they realize, well, you can have a much easier life through making money, through being wealthy. And in order to be wealthy, you can't go back to the days of slavery. So you have to employ people. And now you have them too eventually becoming more wealthy. And as you upgrade your product, your wages go up, etc. And if you look at the minimum wage and the low, like, that's why China has a middle class, because people are getting paid more, and there's a shortage of skilled labor because you're making better quality product and everything enhances. That's the nature of economies. Things want to get better, right? And it's already happening. So my grand extrapolation, and I called it, that I wrote in 1980, yes, it was called The Coming of the Golden Age. And the golden age is when all of the world is caught up and when wealth is universal. Yeah. And also, you're going to have, yes, you've got a lot of wealth that's concentrated by corporations and private individuals. However, the wealth of corporations is something that's accessible to everybody. I can buy shares in Microsoft or IBM or Tesla or whatever company I want to, and I can partake in that wealth. Yes. So most people, the average American, more than, right, the majority of Americans own stock, and likewise in Europe. Yeah. So they are part of the means of production, right? This was Karl Marx's dream, that the worker is also owning the means of production, right? That's why capitalism, which was his term, was such a big deal. Those with capital had an undue advantage. However, in today's world, with stocks and this, you can own part of the production, but it requires wealth to become a part owner, right? So now, yes, I'm working for the company, but I also own shares in the company and I get a dividend. So I'm sharing in the profits. Yeah. And this is a very profound shift in the world. Very, very profound shift. All because of wealth. Wealth is the great changer. Now, what happens when people aren't working 16 hours, 12 hours? I mean, already I see in some places in the world, they got a 4-day working week, not even a 5-day. Yeah. And we work 8 hours, maybe an hour off for lunch. It used to be, it was 12, 14 hours. All you did was work. Yeah. So we've had significant shifts, and we have free time. What happens with free time? Look at the explosion of spirituality and everything related to spirituality, right? Whether it be alternate religions, whether it be things like shamanism, whether it be, peyote and the church of peyote, ayahuasca, all of the stuff. 1 second, Bean, let me just finish this point here. Please, I want to hear from you. All of the stuff comes because people have free time. And the wealthier you are, the more free time you have. And of course, yes, initially you put it all into play, but play is learning. And the more you play, the more you want more, and the more you start to evolve. So in my story, Jesus and Mercury see this, and the story is about how they enable it to happen to get us to where we are today. And then my story takes a little twist there, and there's an anomaly that happens in terms of the New Nobility Corporation, and they start this idea of seeding the stars. And now the Council of the Gods story connects to the Biala series story. And it's a long story to get there, but it's quite powerful. Yes, Bina, please share.
No, I was because it's been more than 2 hours now, and I have to go. It's getting very late for me. So, but yes, that's interesting. But I have to leave now. So this is what I was sharing.
Say again, Bina, what you said. Sorry, I was reading Joseph's comment and I missed
No,
you.
I was just saying that, okay, it is getting late for me. It's more than like 2 hours
Oh,
now.
right. All right. Yeah,
Yes,
we've
I
gone
have.
long. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Joseph, to summarize, right? I finished my whole long story, but I wanted to share it. To summarize, what is the core conception of the entire philosophy that I propose, that I expound, that I share? The core conception is appropriateness. So what you're talking about when it comes to cultural appropriateness and people taking the thing from Amina and sharing it like the mummy, etc. Yes, this is about appropriateness. I always thought you don't want your grave disturbed, but you're happy disturbing ancient graves. How does this make any sense whatsoever? If you don't want your grave disturbed, and it's illegal to go and do grave robbery, but it's legal when it's ancient. That's just hypocrisy. That's just BS. It's complete and utter bullshit, right? So for me, it's about appropriateness. Just because it's ancient doesn't mean it's appropriate. If you see your grave is inviolate, it's inviolate forever. End of story. End of story, right? So all of that whole, digging up graves, no, sorry. Yes, okay, you can maybe unearth ruins, like Troy. There wasn't anything, they weren't buried on purpose to keep it private. It just fell by the wayside, no problem. But the graves, the intent of the grave is to keep it sacrosanct. So violating graves, no. To me, from an anthropology point of view, this is an absolute no-no. An absolute no-no. Things that were meant to be private and sealed, no. Yeah, same like the pyramids. I mean, mostly we see the pyramids, we don't realize that inside it's an extensive tomb, and all these passages and tombs and secret things. Those were designed to be secret. If you have any respect for stuff, then you must honor that. Even if you know it there, you scan it with radar or whatever. You say, "Oh, the tunnels." No, we can't explore it. Right? So to me, appropriateness is what rules the day in everything. So all of what you're talking about is inappropriateness. The specifics will vary, but when you see it as appropriateness, then it's much, much more simple. Not having respect for somebody's profound, deep wishes. This is a very important thing. Yeah, have respect for other people, what they want, right? And you want that respect for your own stuff. So it's just hypocrisy, right? And it's greed. So yeah. So there's appropriation, like when it comes to farming. Yeah, farming techniques. If you can grow something better and help your thing, well, it may be something that people tried to keep secret because they wanted to have a survival advantage over everybody else. But can you really hold that as private? Something that enhances survival of everybody? It's a big question there, right? I don't think so. But nonetheless, when I'm looking to survive and I see you doing something that grows your crops better than mine, I'm going to use it. End of story, right? So even nature conspires with appropriation. I have a superior seed strain that I develop. The wind comes and blows my seeds into your crop, and you get benefit of it too, right? So nature shares. Nature shares, and nature borrows here, there, and everywhere, right? That's how we evolve, through things, mutations and collaboration, cross-pollination, stuff like that, right? This is part of our evolutionary process. So when we understand it in that sense, it makes a very big difference. So again, Joseph, for me, I look at things in this big overview, and when we escape out of bubble views, then we start to see the world in a different way. And part of that council of the gods is looking at the world through the lens of the viewpoint of the gods. Now, the gods here are complicated too, because they had in the past become aware of how horrible they were, how bubble they were, how terrible they were, how narcissistic they were, how abusive they were, how one-sided they were, right? How manipulative, all the stuff, right? I mean, if you read Homer, the whole Homer is a story about just the egregiousness of the gods. And this is what leads to the second book. At the end of the Trojan War, Odysseus says to his pal, I forget his name's the veteran. It'll come to me. Anyway, he says to him, but what was this all for? Did we just have this 10 years of our lives that we wasted over here just for the pleasure and the sport and the humor of capricious gods? Yeah, for capriciousness, for childishness, for no good reason, in other words. And of course, this is an awful truth that the gods don't like, or some of them, and they make his trip back home very difficult. And we have the whole Odyssey story, right? But that Odyssey story shows that you can, through using your wits, through using awareness, through using strategy, using sensibility, you're not at the mercy of the gods. And it changed humanity, right? It's a very, very influential story, because people realized that, it broke the power of the hold of this belief in the gods, right? Very good. Yeah, the gods must be crazy. Exactly. Exactly. But anyway, in my story, the gods realized that they were crazy, right? In the first council of the gods, which is way much earlier, right? Many, many, many millennia before this. But so where we come to them in the late 1400s, and they already started to practice and to evolve. Now, as gods, to break a habit, it's much more difficult, because you've had millennia of this, not just one lifetime. So the habit is deeply entrenched. Plus, you don't have the pressure of death to motivate you to change, right? You're changing because of conscience, because of integrity. Very difficult. Very difficult. There's no real pressure on you to change. So the gods are still struggling in their own evolution, but they at least come to a point where they are trying to be better. And they've also come to the point in my story where they've realized that all the meddling that they did, right, they came to see cause and effect. All their egregious meddling in the lives of humans for their own personal reasons, right, just for because they wanted to, right, they got backlash from the universe, and they ended up in not having fun and being very miserable for very long periods of time as a consequence, right? So they've also realized their need to be ethical, and so they are learning to be ethical, which brings us to the new nobility story, the Biala series, in which the gods are observers of Biala, specifically as an exemplar of the new nobility, of the noble ideal, of mourners culture. And they say, we can learn here. Yeah. And they want to see, because obviously the end point of that is that, the new nobility, this culture, that they are learning to be more. They're learning to transcend what is typically regarded to be human. Yeah, which is a very powerful story longer term. So what I'm sharing is that there's a moreness to what I do in everything. There's layer upon layer upon layer. And when we understand history from this perspective, from the perspective of the enhancement and development of awareness, changes everything. And in my story of the Council of the Gods, we see how they start to become in attune with attunement, right? They start to understand attunement, and they only meddle when they think it's absolutely vital and necessary, and when their goal is the overall greater benefit of sentience. Yeah, very, very cool. Yeah, but Norma, what but? I love that. The gods must be crazy. That's quite a fun movie. A better movie by that guy, I mentioned it to Joseph as well, is it's a movie by the same guy, Jamie Ace, right? And it's called The Gods Must Be Crazy. By the way, look at the credits of The Gods Must Be Crazy. Written by Jamie Ace, produced by Jamie Ace, filmed by Jamie Ace. He did the whole movie all by himself. A really fantastic movie about life in essentially a river oasis in the Namib, in the Kalahari. It's a river that doesn't end in the sea; it ends in the desert, right? And it has drought and surplus. It's a very unique little mini eco-culture, microculture, micro nature culture, and you see all sorts of wonderful stuff there. Fantastic movie. So by the same guy, look it up. Beautiful People. Make sure to look for Beautiful People by Jamie Ace, because there's some other more modern movie called Beautiful People that has nothing to do with animals in the desert. Right? There's some quite interesting stuff in that movie. Yeah, very cool movie. But The Gods Must Be Crazy was a fun movie too. The Bushmen that I hung out with, they knew that guy in The Gods Must Be Crazy. And that he's not acting. That is how he is, that guy, right? And he said he lives out in the very remote Kalahari, right? Very hard to get to him. Yeah, God Samuel Kasferis, exactly. Exactly. I always said to people who believe in whatever their particular deity is, that and insist their deity is real, say, well, I believe in the fairy queen. Tell me the fairy queen isn't real. I have as much evidence to support me in my belief of the fairy queen as you do in whatever deity you have. But people will swear, I don't, no, this is a fact, this is true. It's belief. Belief by its very definition means it's not a proven fact. If it was a fact, then it wouldn't be belief. You wouldn't need to believe in your deity. If you're believing, then you can't say, I can't believe in mine. I have as much justification and rationale and logic to support my belief in the fairy queen as you do for your deity. There's not any more evidence to support yours than it is to support the fairy queen. Well, anyway, I mean, I just use this as an example. Like I said, I believe in everything. They all exist, you know. But anyway, I was telling you about the Bushmen. So they had originally come from the southern Kalahari, where they were, but they got around, all right, because they're able to get around, and they ended up there because they didn't really have any other place to be. At any rate, they knew this guy, and they'd been to his camp out in the very remote Kalahari. And they said all that money that he got paid, and there was a big controversy about him getting paid, and he got paid, and he got, but he didn't want any of the money. He had no use for it. And they said that sat in piles over there. When the wind came, it would blow the money away. You know, they used it to start fires with. And absolutely no value to him whatsoever. They were very amused at this because they had come to understand the value of money. Anyway, that was his choice. He lived out there by himself out in the very remote Kalahari. Very hard to get to. Very interesting fellow. So the gods within, as different as we see. Yes, exactly, Norma. And when we realize this, and that, you know, that being a god is a matter of emphasis, belief, world description, right? And when we understand this, at least in my story, the gods have become aware that they became gods because of egregious ego. Ego running away with itself to extremes. Ego that was so convinced of its own wonderfulness, right, that they became gods out of sheer emphasis and belief. I'm special, I'm wonderful, I'm more. And they developed this. It's something that's available to all of us. And in my story, there's a God gene in all of us. And the gods on the story, well, earlier than that, when they were egregious and they wanted to maintain when they realized, oh, well, anybody can become a god, right? If they simply have enough ego and belief in themselves and enough narcissism, they would become this. They switched off the god gene. It gets reactivated in my story. But anyway, a marvelous story, lots of mourners to it, right? But you know what I like about my stories is like the Council of the God story, right? Yes, it's fantastical. It's my imagination. But when you look at the actuality of what I'm sharing, which is, right, if you go to the, not in the Biala series, but where we're observing from the time of Columbus, and we're going through history, and we see all the different events, right? And we see when they meddle in that. And we see that there's a reason why these things happen, and a good reason. It makes us less fearful in the world, for one thing. We start to understand it. I may not get it right now, but you know, I've been reading about all of these instances and all of these past historical things. I can see that there was a good reason for it. It may or may not be, but I can see it's exceedingly plausible. And that gives me comfort. That gives me ease, right? And that's very, very, very stress relieving and very important from that point of view of understanding things from a greater awareness. It's massively useful. People stress a lot about all the negative stuff in the world, right? They think the world is going to end, and this is something that's been going on for centuries, right? And the world hasn't ended. So this is a very, very powerful mechanism to develop that mindset of, like in this case, to learn to think like the gods. Seeing things from this overview perspective changes everything. Overview perspective changes absolutely everything. And when we go through this and we see the evolution of the gods themselves, we get to understand, hey, there's moreness involved. And then we start to get into moreness culture. And things start to fall into place, and they all make sense. I live in a world, in a universe, where things make sense in a capital M, capital S. My world makes total sense. It's a marvelous, fantastical, awesome, incredible place. Everything makes sense. Everything to me makes sense. Very wonderful place to be in. Very wonderful place to be in. And it's not just because I believe it, because I have substantiation for it. That's very different to belief. A lot of people might believe so, but to have it substantiated, that's a very different thing, right? Changes your belief. Very cool. All right, it was very long today. I didn't mean to share all this. We didn't even get to read either. but you know, your comments are very important, Joseph. And I really want to emphasize, you know, what I'm about. There's a moreness that I'm about. And to really hear me is to take what I'm saying and break the categories that you put it into, break the assumptions of what I'm doing and why I'm doing, because what I'm doing is a bigger picture than what we typically see. And if you try and box and put me into the usual paradigms, the usual expectations, the typical stuff that I'm like this, I'm like that, the moment you start boxing me, you're going to miss what I'm doing. There's a great vast moreness to what I'm doing. And it's a thought through, to the end, thought through moreness. It's not a belief system. It's not a belief system. It's substantiated. Substantiation has always been absolutely essential to me. Like the story, yes, it's a fictional story, but the substantiation is very real. And it proves my point, right? So whether or not you might believe in the gods or not, they're just a tool, a mechanism for saying whatever it is. I just think as the universe in general, whatever it is, there's a moreness at play that influences and affects whatever is going on all the time. And when we understand this, life changes, right? Life changes. Yes. Thank you all, says Christopher Abbott. Yes, absolutely. Thank you all. And thank you to Ahad and to Kukipoda for joining us on IG as well. Wonderful. It's a very long live, but you know, I was sharing specifically to put everything I do into context, right, Joseph? Because now you get a very different view on what I'm doing. And when you understand me through this overview perspective and also through this fundamental concept of appropriateness, chapter 1 of the Biala series is called Just One Word. And that one word is appropriateness, of course. When you understand and you look at me through those lenses and filters, then a lot of what I do makes a lot more sense. And you kind of see where I'm coming from, right? Now, of course, a lot of what I share, it will take time to learn because it's a new paradigm. That's very important. See, like I was talking about, you know, when we understand cultural appropriateness through the paradigm of the superiority paradigm, we get an entirely different perspective. Yes. And when we understand it through the lens of appropriateness in the bigger picture, very different perspective once again. So when you see that's where I'm coming from, and of course, impeccability, honesty, integrity, and this is respect. This is fundamental to what moreness culture is, right? The core definitions of impeccability, one of them is giving due respect, due. I'm not going to respect you, Mr. Gangster, you know, that, you know, hooligan who's insisting on, oh, I must be respected, don't diss me, etc. You just want respect to boost your ego. You don't deserve it in one iota. You're a criminal. Sorry. You know, you're not a nice person. You practice bullying and manipulation and abuse and all sorts of horrible things. How can I respect that? I can't. Yeah. I can respect that you have some sort of temporary power, that I respect the fact that you can be violent and idiotic. I respect that, yes. But in the way that respect is generally given, no, absolutely not. Right? So due respect, very, very, very important. Any comments, any questions before I go? Joseph, Christopher, Norma? Sure, if you're still here. I doubt if Sher's still here. Probably taking care of her people over there. But just in case. So magical, so magical. Any comments before I go? I'm just looking there. I'm just waiting a little bit. All right, very cool. On that note, I'll end it all. No more comments there. Brilliant, brilliant. So I hope that helps, Joseph, to put what I'm sharing into a bigger context, right? There's a moreness, in other words, to it all, as a great big moreness. So none of what I'm doing is, I hope, inappropriate. Never. I cannot be inappropriate. If I am, I'm being unaware, and I constantly strive for awareness. But whatever I'm doing, I am making an effort to be appropriate. Always, always, always. And my appropriateness is bigger picture, not bubble, not bubble. We can be appropriate in a bubble and be inappropriate in the bigger context. Yes, this happens all the time in our lives. I'm very, very, very cautious of that. That's why overview perspective, universal perspective is absolutely fundamental to everything that I do. Looking at things from that abstract viewpoint. Very powerful, very useful. Yes. All right. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you tomorrow. I hope that cleared some things up. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye. Love it, Joseph. Absolutely love it, by the way. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Norma. Very cool. Very cool. Bye-bye. 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 See you tomorrow. And meeting